Chapter 537. The kelp forest is distributed in a long strip, with a total of about 36,000 acres, but the west end of this strip is close to the sea and the east end is far away from the sea. List's current exploration area is the west end of the sea, about one-third, that is, about 12,000 acres, of which 2,500 acres is about the distribution range of the Potion giant algae. Further to the east, the water depth has gradually reached 80 meters, the bottom of the sea is rugged, and some places even reach more than 100 meters deep. The fish living in this part of the kelp forest are getting bigger and bigger, and there are even fierce predators such as sharks lurking on the bottom of the sea. Of course, even under the water, List Chi is not flexible enough, but he can still easily kill fierce sharks, not to mention the help of the water magician A Chi. As long as there are no sea monsters, he is safe on the bottom of the sea. The eastern end of the kelp forest is not suitable for mariculture. The water is too deep and there are sharks. It is very dangerous for ordinary fishermen to come here to harvest giant algae. Even if the territory promotes Qi, ordinary fishermen may have Qi in the future, it is still dangerous. The territory of the night is the land and the sky. The sea is not within the scope. Even the water attribute night will be tied in the sea and will drown if he is not careful. Not only the night but also the magician cannot conquer the sea. Human flesh and blood are not naturally suitable for action in the sea. Whether it is a dragon knight or a magic shooter, they will suffer when they go into the water. This is also the reason why the Grand Duchy of Sapphire is tirelessly attacking the mainland. Even island countries have difficulty conquering the sea, let alone those on land countries. Without the existence of the siren A Chi, List would also find it difficult to develop the sea. At least before technology has developed to the point of underwater work, the sea is synonymous with danger. Even on the Earth in the age of technology, human beings cannot completely conquer the sea. In the face of the sea buried with countless resources, they can only stare. There are only a few countries that can exploit oil in the sea. However, List has the siren A Chi and the sea is no longer so mysterious. A Chi, it will take a lot of time to explore the kelp forest. Today we will develop the Potion giant algae. I have redesigned the placement of the giant algae worm stalk. In the future, the planting area of the Potion giant algae will gradually move to the sea. You are underwater. Cut off all the Potion giant algae in this part of the area, let them surface. I will send fishermen to fish. Yes. Achi was a good siren who worked hard without complaint. She would never refuse a task assigned by List. Watching her swiftly sink to the bottom of the sea, List was deeply moved. Among the many rewards that the smoke mission had brought him, the most important one was Achi. Even the little fire dragon Leo couldn't compare to Achi in his heart. If he had to choose one to give up, he would rather give up on Leo. Of course, this thought would not be revealed to Leo. Otherwise, if Leo got angry, he might really fly away. It was hard to say. With List serving him well, he might not be willing to leave. The harvesting of the giant algae soon began. Nearly 600 acres of magic algae were not within List's scope of planning and could be cut down. It was not difficult to distinguish between giant seaweed and giant seaweed. Those with slender leaves were giant seaweed, while those with slightly thicker leaves were ordinary giant seaweed. There was no doubt about Achi's ability to work. Soon there were huge groups of yellow-brown giant seaweed floating on the sea. The Black Horse Islands dinghy fishing team had developed to more than 300. List transferred 100 of them to search for the giant seaweed drifting on the sea and transport it to the shore. Then a serf loaded the giant seaweed into a car, took it to the magic workshop in Port Town, and handed it over to Chris Truth. It was inevitable that Achi had cut the ordinary giant seaweed by mistake in a hurry, but the magician had a way to distinguish between magic algae and ordinary plants. List did not forget to tell the official in charge of the transportation, "Don't throw away the ordinary giant seaweed that was cut wrongly. Send someone to find out if it is edible and if there is any other value that can be used." 36,000 acres of giant seaweed, if it could not be eaten or used, it would be a waste. Preparing to harvest 600 acres of magic herbs, only Achi was constantly harvesting, and the speed was not fast. List also dived underwater and harvested as many magic herbs as possible. His ability to hold his breath underwater was getting stronger and stronger. Now he could swim underwater for 25 minutes without breathing. This was without Achi controlling the water flow to help him, which showed his rapid progress. He first followed the giant seaweed plantation plan he had been working on last night. He brought along the 2 giant seaweed fairies and 3 giant seaweed sprite worms that he had already contracted to migrate the worm stalks. He moved as far as possible to the offshore area, and made sure that the range of the worm stalks did not overlap with each other to maximize the planting area. Then he chose a place with a water depth of no more than 20 meters and delimited an experimental field. He experimented with the growth, harvesting, and reproduction of the giant seaweed. Based on his understanding of algae, it was a very primitive plant, and some algae could not even be called plants but primitive creatures. But in this world, most algae could breed sprite worms, so it was naturally classified as a plant. He had observed kelp before. There were small bumps on the leaves of kelp. The small bumps on the leaves of a mature kelp would break, and there would probably be kelp seeds inside. He had asked Chi to test it. When a section of mature kelp was buried in the mud, kelp seedlings would soon germinate. The giant seaweed was probably similar to kelp, and could also reproduce in this way. Moreover, with the help of Fitz and Tam, it was much easier for him to reproduce the giant seaweed. He could let the sprites reproduce on their own using the jade powder as the driving force. Sprites had the magic of planting. For example, Ella could casually plant thorns, Nami could casually plant mangroves, Mickey could casually plant corn, and Fitz and Tam could casually plant giant seaweed. However, sprites were not professional farmers, and when they planted, they scattered the giant seaweed regardless of the quality, density, or location. After scattering, they would not take care of the giant seaweed, which required manual management. In particular, during the seedling stage, the sprites scattered by the sprites varied in strength, and many of them were unqualified. Artificial selection of seeds was more qualified. The only pity was that the sprites could not distinguish between magic herb seeds and ordinary seeds. In essence, magic herbs still had to be artificially bred. Now, the giant seaweed planting was not urgent. Liszt mainly experimented with the harvesting and growth of the giant seaweed. He cut off 10 meters, 20 meters, and 30 meters of different parts of the giant seaweed in the experimental field, leaving the remaining giant seaweed of different lengths to see if they would die or continue to grow. If they could continue to grow, then the giant seaweed could be harvested batch by batch. If they could not continue to grow, then he would have to breed seedlings. In the evening, Liszt met up with Chi, who had been busy all day, and received good news. "Brother, Chi found another giant seaweed sprite worm while harvesting the magic herb giant seaweed." "Is that so? Take me to it." Diving, finding the sprite worm, sprinkling jade powder to seduce it, and the contract was naturally successful. So far, he had obtained 2 sprites and 4 sprite worms from the giant seaweed forest. It was like running into a nest of sprites. Moreover, there were still 2/3 of the giant seaweed forest waiting for him to explore. There were more secrets in the smoke mission, and it might really be the big sprite that he was looking forward to. Chapter 538. Lord Viscount, the giant seaweed you found in the sea is really unbelievable. There are actually magic potions in the sea, and there are even elves living there. Night. The magic workshop was lit with crystal lamps. There were 4 crystal lamps installed in the workshop alone, illuminating every corner. These crystal lamps were all provided by Liszt. He had given many crystals to the crystal craftsman, Brad, to carve and then make magic equipment. Among them were more than 30 crystal lamps. Chris Truth was refining the magic juice of the giant seaweed while talking to Liszt, who came to inspect. "This is a very amazing discovery. Unfortunately, I can't swim, otherwise I would really like to go to the sea and see the giant seaweed forest you mentioned. Every giant seaweed is so huge, the giant seaweed forest must be extremely magnificent." It is indeed magnificent, but the view in the sea is relatively narrow. In addition to looking magnificent, it also looks a little gloomy. Yes, sometimes when I sail on a boat and look at the deep blue, I can't help but feel fear in my heart, as if the sea will swallow me at any time. This is deep sea phobia. Liszt said with a smile. The deep sea has all the factors that make people afraid. Ferocious sea monsters, unknown creatures, oppressive colors, unknown climate, far away from the mainland, isolated and helpless. The vast waters of the vast sea, drowning at any time, all these can lead to deep sea phobia. In summary, there was only one sentence. God knows what was under the water. Chris did not quite understand. Is this an illness? It's not an illness, just a psychological effect, a fear of the unknown. As long as you face it hard, you can basically overcome it. It seems that I should learn how to swim. Yes, as an islander, it's a bit unreasonable not to know how to swim. Liszt did not continue on this topic. After a few idle words, he went straight to the point. How is the magic potion production of the giant seaweed? Compared to the magic potions on land, is it better? If we look at magic potions of equal weight, the production of the giant seaweed is not excellent, and the magic it contains is relatively thin. However, a single giant seaweed is tens of meters long and can be used to refine several potions. I'm afraid I won't be able to do it alone, Lord Viscount, if you send too many giant seaweeds. Is that so? Then I will stop harvesting tomorrow. I will continue harvesting when you are free. Yes, I estimate that this batch of giant seaweed will keep me busy for 3 days. I should be able to produce around 400 giant seaweed potions, Chris said. List alone needed about 10 potions a day, and Charmander needed 60 potions, which added up to 70 potions. Putting aside the medicinal effects of the 400 giant seaweed potions, a rough estimate would be that they could last for 5 to 6 days. Today's harvest of the giant seaweed magic ingredient was less than 100 mu. 600 acres of seaweed potion ready to be harvested would last him and Leo a month. As for the remaining 1,900 mu of giant seaweed magic herbs, they could last for another 3 months after harvesting. In other words, the giant seaweed potion in the giant seaweed forest was enough for him and Charmander to live comfortably for 4 months. He had indeed struck it rich. In these 4 months, the territory would continue to produce other magic herbs, and with the purchase from outside, it was estimated that they could last for another 3 months. In other words, this year there was no need to worry about magic herbs. By next year, the scale of the flame mushroom should be developed. At that time, the flame potion and giant seaweed potion would support the main part, and the black potion, ice flame potion and thorns potion would make up the small part, with the assistance of the black nightshade. His demand for magic herbs had basically been met, and the remaining part would not be difficult to solve if he thought of a way. With the knot in his heart unraveled, his mood instantly relaxed, and the accumulated depression from before dissipated. He held back his proud smile and said gently, "Chris, I am currently in a critical period of training and I need to take a lot of magic herbs. So during this time I may have to trouble you to make more magic herbs. I am really sorry to make you work day and night. You don't have to be so concerned. I am already a great sorcerer, and my technical operations are getting more and more precise. It is very easy to extract the magic juice from the magic herbs, and it is not difficult to make them into magic herbs. It's just that a few of the subtle operations may take a lot of effort. Viscount, I want to bring a group of apprentices." "Bringing apprentices? That's a good thing. You can choose between children from the orphanage and civilian children." List raised his hands and feet in approval. In fact, he had long wanted Chris to bring magic apprentices. The mages of this era were a little mentally ill, but that was because the pursuit of truth distorted their worldview. In the territory of Black Horse Island, List would directly intervene in the growth of the mages and would never let them deviate from the correct worldview. He was more willing to train the mages to become scholars who studied magic, runes and magic arrays. There was no need for them to go to the battlefield. They only needed to learn how to produce magic potions, make magic equipment and conquer various magic arrays. Chris nodded and said, "At the Great Sorcerer stage, a lot of research work takes a long time and is meticulous. The power of one person is very limited. I now finally understand why the Great Sorcerer of the Goat Gathering would train ordinary mages like us. I plan to bring 10 magic apprentices first." "Chris, I have a proposal for you to consider." "Sir Viscount, please speak." "I want to build a magic academy. No, it should be called a magic academy, responsible for training production and research mages, not pursuing magic in combat. Some of the students of the magic academy will learn how to make potions, or even only learn one part of the process. Some students will learn another part, and some students will learn how to make magic equipment." He wanted to dismantle the mages into assembly line workers. After all, training a mage required not only resources but also time. He did not have the patience to wait for years or even 10 years for an apprentice to become a mage. A fast-track assembly line worker was the best choice. Chris thought carefully and replied, "If we specialize in the production of potions, this method is indeed feasible, but it is difficult to produce magic equipment. Only mages can understand the concept of magic arrays. Then we will train students who specialize in the production of potions. By the way, potion production can be classified separately as pharmaceutics. Students who can produce potions will be called pharmacists. How about that?" "Pharmacists?" Chris smiled and nodded. "I have no objection. I can also shoulder the work of the Magic Academy, but it takes too much energy to train students. I hope that Sir Viscount can hire a few mages from other places to assist me in managing the Magic Academy." Chapter 539. This chapter is titled, "My Horse Feeds the Sheep." List left the preparations for the Magic Academy to Crazy and Gort, so he did not continue to pay attention to them. Back at his temporary residence in Port Town, He immediately took out the dozen or so giant algae potions that Crazy had made and swallowed them one by one. Then he took out a thick bast paper to record. Only by analyzing the nature of the giant algae potion could he make a better potion. Roar! 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 The little fire dragon Leo was restless in his chest, asking to eat the potion. List had to appease him. Don't be impatient. Let me analyze the nature of the giant algae potion first. When I'm done you will eat it. Roar! Roar! Leo was still crying for the potion and did not listen to List's explanation. It was not until List took out a few more giant algae potions and gave them to him that he was barely appeased. Only then did he have the opportunity to study the nature of the potion through the remaining 3 giant algae potions. He wrote on a thick bast paper and basically understood the nature of the potion. The potion's effect was chaotic, similar to the black potion, but not as good as the thorn potion. However, it was obviously not as helpful to List and Leo as the flame potion and the ice flame potion, because these 2 potions were fire magic potions and were very suitable for a human and a dragon. It's a pity that I don't have the black nightshade as a supplement, or I could try the combination of the 2. After swallowing the potion, List operated the dragon's fighting energy for a while, but he had nothing else to do. He did not sleep immediately. Instead, he continued to write and draw on the thick bast paper, thinking about the giant algae forest and how to place the worm stalks to maximize the benefits, as well as the possible existence of the giant algae sprites. However, it was obviously very difficult to develop a farming industry at the bottom of the sea. It's best to let a chi explore the topography of the seabed, and then improve the position of the giant algae forest so that the giant algae can grow near the sea, which will make it easier to manage and harvest. But I haven't even figured out the giant algae forest, so it's too early to talk about transformation. Put away the pen and paper. Then he suddenly thought of something. Writing on thick bast paper and a quill is very inconvenient. Now that I have the ability to protect myself, it is time to invent white paper. If possible, I will try to figure out how to make pencils and pens. I probably won't be able to make ballpoint pens and gel pens. The nib of a gel pen and the ball of a ballpoint pen were not achievable by current technology. The fountain pen, on the other hand, was slightly simpler. However, the fountain pen technology was not small either. The easiest to invent should be the pencil. Unfortunately, the lead of the pencil seemed to be made of graphite. List had no idea where the graphite mine was. He probably had to continue writing with the quill. Another option was to invent a writing brush. Writing brushes were relatively easy to make, and the materials were also convenient. However, although writing Chinese characters with a brush looked good, it was not necessarily more convenient than writing with a goose feather pen. Especially snake script and wind language, which were crooked lines. Writing with a hard pen like a goose feather pen might be more comfortable. In any case, if we can find graphite, we should invent the pencil as soon as possible. First, arrange for someone to try making a writing brush. Let's see whether writing with a writing brush or a quill is more convenient. In that case, it was a good night's dream. The next day, after communicating with a chi, List stopped harvesting the giant seaweed and continued to search the rest of the giant seaweed forest. At the same time, he arranged for fishermen to dive in the offshore area to harvest ordinary giant seaweed to make room for planting the giant seaweed. He searched for worm stalks in the deep water area. The difficulty was high, especially in the deep water area where the water pressure was very high. It was a huge challenge for List to hold his breath. Unfortunately, he could not pass on magic eyes to a chi. He could only continue to dive and surface by himself, using magic eyes to scan every area of the giant seaweed forest. In the morning, he advanced thousands of acres of land, but did not find a single sprite. Somewhat disappointed, he rowed back. Just as he came ashore, he was attracted by a piece of news. He listened to the valet Thomas describe vividly, "Master, many serfs saw lame Billy fall into the sea. When he was about to drown, a colorful sea monster suddenly rushed out, lifted Billy up and sent him to the shore. I was standing on the shore at that time and saw it clearly. It really was a colorful sea monster." A colorful sea monster? Sent him to the shore? Does Billy not know how to swim? "Master, many of the new fishermen have not learned to swim." "Is that so?" List immediately thought of the colorful dolphin that a chi mentioned, which was the low-level dragon beast that he thought was his reward for the smoke mission. A colorful dolphin can actually save people? This seems to be consistent with the news I heard on Earth that dolphins will save people who fall into the water. List had seen a documentary that said dolphins have great concern and enthusiasm for rescuing objects that do not actively move in the water. Many people claimed that they were rescued by dolphins when they fell into the water and were pushed out of the water. Some people had done experiments and found that whether it was dead turtles, old air mattresses, lifebuoys, or thick planks, dolphins would do the same thing. Marine mammal experts believed that this originated from dolphins' nature to care for their children. As mammals, they had no gills and needed to surface to breathe. But the baby dolphin often could not return to the surface in time, so the dolphin mother would help it up and send it to the surface. Now, this colorful dolphin did the same thing and saved a serf who fell into the water. This gave Liszt a good impression of it, and he quickly formulated a plan to capture it: let people pretend to fall into the water, lure it to rescue, and then cast a net to capture it. However, if I capture it now, doesn't that mean I have to change the mission? He called out the smoke mission. The mission content had not changed, which proved that more secrets of the giant kelp forest had not been discovered. I am still not sure what the secret of the giant kelp forest is. If I interfere with the mission and instead neglect the real secret, wouldn't the gains outweigh the losses? The giant kelp chain mission. It was likely to involve the giant kelp sprite, so Liszt did not dare to be careless. The value of the giant kelp sprite, Liszt was not willing to exchange it for 100 low-level dragon beasts. After all, the dragon beasts were only slightly more advanced than the World of Warcraft, but the giant kelp sprite could grow at least 6,000 mu of giant kelp, and its value was immeasurable. The reason why the tulip family was so strong, able to support a large family and train a large number of Earth Knights, was because of the tulip sprite's continuous growth of magic potions. Without the sprite, it was difficult to even support a Sky Knight, let alone maintain the large-scale consumption of orders of chivalry in the castle. I will let it be free for a few days. When I find the giant kelp sprite, I will subdue this colorful dolphin. It seems very cool to have a dragon-type sea monster as a mount. So it was. In the blink of an eye, the day passed. At dusk, Liszt had already left. Achi still worked overtime as usual, preparing to return to Mangrove Island when it was completely dark. Shuttling through the increasingly thick giant kelp, she constantly explored new areas. Some fierce sharks even dared to attack her, but when she controlled the water to beat them, the sharks hurriedly ran away. As for killing them, it was even simpler. Liszt had told her a method. She just had to turn the shark over with its belly up and the shark would soon faint. Achi had tested it and it was indeed so. When the shark was belly up, it directly fainted and its life was at her mercy. After scaring away the shark, she saw a huge starfish, wondering if it was a sea monster, but when she approached it, she did not feel the breath of magic, and it was still just an ordinary starfish. Just as she was constantly searching. Suddenly, a giant kelp in front of her attracted her attention. She could not help but open her mouth, so surprised that she wanted to shout. It could no longer be called a giant kelp, it should be called a giant pillar in the water. The thick roots of the giant kelp grasped the seabed rocks hundreds of meters deep, almost like a wall at least 2 or 3 meters in diameter, and the leaves on it were also very huge, curving and hovering in the sea. The leaves on it were also very large. They curled and spiraled in the sea, looking like a huge sea snake. Worm grass. Chapter 540. He got up early in the morning and opened the window. The sun was beautiful. It was another sunny day. As April continued to turn, the weather on Black Horse Island was getting better day by day. After the end of the spring plowing, the surf army had returned to construction. Several small towns' wooden houses rose from the ground, roads were connected, and craftsman workshops were put into operation one by one. The transfer of worm stalks was also gradually completed. Now, except for the apple tree worm stalks, tomato worm stalks, and Venus flytrap worm stalks, which were still planted in Flower Town, all the other worm stalks were moved to Black Horse Island. Plantations were divided in each town to settle these worm stalks. Even the castle servants were sent to the port town to serve Liszt. By the way, they were also adapting to life in the port town and contributing to the establishment of the new castle in the future. There were more than 30 servants in the castle, but there were still 30 or 40 children practicing. There was no law prohibiting the use of child labor in this world. Children practicing in the castle, whether it is the quality of life or future employment, are fully guaranteed. Many civilian parents want to send their children to the castle for internship. He simply washed up and did not take a bath. Anyway, he was going to go into the water later, so there was no need to take another bath. After breakfast, it was not yet 7:30, and the fishermen who harvested the giant algae on the beach were already working hard. Liszt came to the beach, jumped on a sampan, and was ready to paddle in the direction of the giant algae forest. At the same time, he habitually called out the smoke mission and took a look. Just a single glance was enough to stun him. Mission completed, reward, a colorful dolphin. This reward was no surprise. As early as 2 days ago, he had guessed that the colorful dolphin that Ichi was chasing would be his reward, a low-level dragon sea monster. What was unexpected was the new smoke mission. Quest. Ichi has discovered the core secret of the kelp forest at the bottom of the sea. It is a giant kelp worm stalk that belongs to a ferocious kelp sprite. Ichi can't even get close to it. Perhaps you need a new helper. Why not obtain a water mount first? Reward, a giant algae spirit. Giant algae spirit. It really is the giant algae spirit. Ichi has found its worm stalk and obviously had contact with it. During this period of time, List had been thinking about this giant kelp sprite day and night. Now that he had finally received confirmation of its existence, one could well imagine his mood. Great sprites were the status symbols of earls and lords. Only families with great sprites would dare to call themselves great nobles. Now, he passed the giant seaweed chain mission. He was finally going to obtain a greater elf and join the ranks of greater nobles. If he released Leo, he might be able to instantly join the ranks of dragon knights and attack the king. Of course, he might also be pressed to the ground by the Sapphire Grand Duke and ruthlessly whipped away Leo. In a situation where the little fire dragon could not be exposed, a big elf would be the best symbol of his identity. Inhale. He exhaled. After taking a few deep breaths, he regained his composure. The appearance of the giant seaweed sprite means that we can plant more than 6,000 acres of seaweed magic ingredients. But the most important thing now is how to contract it. I've only heard of wild great sprites in Night Tales, and they usually contract humans on their own. Night Tales were beautiful fantasies. Not only did the great sprites beg the protagonist to contract them, even the dragons begged the protagonist to ride them. There were also a lot of noble ladies who threw themselves at the protagonist. But in reality, elves that took the initiative to contract humans were very rare. Active elves like the mangrove sprite Nami could only be counted as an exception. The giant seaweed sprites were obviously not an exception. They were not close to humans and they were not even close to their companions. Before Fitz and Tam contracted them, they bared their teeth at List and Ichi. Without the fragrant jade powder, there was no way to contract them. After the contract, they often quarreled. If it were not for List's mandatory ban, they might have already won. And this giant seaweed sprite, in the description of the smoke mission, was named Brutal, which showed its character. Lesser sprites have mastered planting magic, but the great sprite's planting magic is stronger, and it already has great strength. Even Ichi can't get close to it. I think it must be very difficult to contract it underwater. You must bring enough jade powder and be mentally prepared for a stalemate. The most important thing is to capture the colorful dolphin. The colorful dolphin was the key hint of the smoke mission. List had yet to fully understand the principles or rules of the smoke mission. He also did not know how powerful the smoke dragon's power of fate was, or how it could rely on the threads of fate to create communication. But following the smoke mission was obviously the fastest way. While thinking, he had already rowed the sampan past the fishermen offshore and rowed further away. Ichi had long been paying attention to List underwater, so she quickly came to the surface to meet him. The shell opened and Fitz and Tam, together with the 4 sprite worms, immediately swam towards him and circled around him. "Brother, you finally came." Ichi found the giant seaweed sprite. As soon as they met, Ichi told him about her encounter as if she was presenting a treasure. When she was working overtime, she accidentally found a huge giant seaweed worm stalk. After careful observation, she successfully found the great sprite. It was a baby-sized sprite, the same tawny color as the lesser sprites, and its whole body was bright like a huge gem. It spread its transparent fins, circled around its worm stalk, and happily swam tirelessly. Occasionally, when a fish approached it, it would wave its hand and sprinkle a ray of light. In an instant, giant seaweed would break out of the fish's body and turn them into a pile of minced meat. It is very fierce. After discovering Ichi, it chased Ichi for a long time. Ichi doesn't want to hurt it, but she is also afraid that it will plant giant seaweed on her body. Ichi said in a low voice. In terms of fighting strength, she was definitely superior to the giant seaweed sprite, but she could only be chased and beaten without being able to fight. Is the giant seaweed sprite so fierce? Have you tried to lure it with jade powder? Ichi tried, but it would drive Ichi away before eating the jade powder. Once Ichi turned around and approached it, it would stop eating the jade powder and drive Ichi away. "Brother, this giant seaweed sprite is really fierce and its big mouth looks very scary." The giant seaweed sprite and the lesser sprite were very beautiful, but their mouths and their teeth were a bit frightening. Since the giant seaweed sprite is not easy to contract, then we should first come up with a good way to deal with it in one fell swoop. List said, but before that I plan to catch the colorful dolphin. I saw that it can save people and maybe it can understand human nature. Ah, that sea monster can save people? Achi was very surprised. List briefly explained the matter of the serfs falling into the water and then said, I'll arrange for the serfs to fall into the water, lure out the colorful dolphin, and then try to communicate with it. You hide on the side. If it goes well, then everything will be fine. If it doesn't go well, then we'll catch it first. Okay. After the plan was made, Achi dived and followed List back to the coastal area. He found serfs who could swim and had them pretend to fall into the water to attract the colorful dolphin. He didn't know where the colorful dolphin was hiding, nor how far it had run. The act of pretending to fall into the water lasted from morning to afternoon, but the colorful dolphin didn't appear. Just when List thought it was impossible, the serfs who were shouting for help in the water were suddenly pushed out of the water by something. Immediately. Not far away, List saw through his binoculars that there was indeed a colorful dolphin under the surfs. The dolphin was very large, much larger than the dolphins he had seen in the aquarium on Earth. It might be the size of a killer whale. It had a streamlined body like a dolphin, and the color of its skin reflected the sunlight with a colorful luster. To be precise, it actually looks more like a white whale. List exclaimed in admiration. He quietly rode the sampan and advanced toward the colorful dolphin. In his sampan, there were dozens of extremely delicious small fish. Food was the most important thing for people, and it was obvious that animals also used food as their main motivation to survive. Using food as a lure was the least technical, but at the same time the most effective method. Just as he approached the colorful dolphin, which had pushed the serfs into the water to the shore, suddenly turned around and pushed the serfs toward List. Seeing this. Chapter 541. It was a rainbow dolphin, or more appropriately a rainbow whale. It carried the drowning serfs towards List's sampan. Its purpose was obvious. It wanted to send the serfs to the sampan. List didn't move, but his body was tense. If the rainbow whale dared to attack him, he wouldn't hesitate to leap into the air and let Achi catch it. However, the rainbow whale approached the sampan bit by bit, but it still didn't have any intention to attack. It was just trying to save the serfs. When it reached the side of the sampan, it arched its head and directly bounced the serfs onto the sampan. List's sampan was relatively large, and he used chi to control the sampan so that it wouldn't be smashed by the serfs. The serfs safely boarded the boat. The rainbow whale's head floated on the water's surface and cried cheerfully, chirp, chirp. It was a bit like a magpie's cry. The tone was mellow and varied, just like the rich variety of human language. List could feel its cheerful mood. List also relaxed. This 8 to 9 meter long fellow seemed to be very close to humans. He quickly picked up the small fish at the bow and threw it to the rainbow whale. This small fish was a specialty of Pearl Lake called silverfish. It tasted delicious and had become List's daily necessity. As soon as the rainbow whale saw the small fish, it immediately opened its mouth and swallowed it. It didn't know if it tasted the fish, but it seemed to enjoy it and didn't leave the sampan. It kept its head floating on the water's surface and continued to look at List with its small eyes. List wasn't stingy and threw another silverfish. Chirp, chirp. The rainbow whale was very excited. It had already stretched its head to the side of the sampan and opened its mouth to eat. It didn't know if it was enjoying the delicious silverfish or the free food. The shape of its head was indeed very similar to that of a beluga whale. It had a large and round forehead and a slightly large mouth, but it didn't have many teeth. Its eyes were on both sides of its head and were a bit small compared to its body. The rainbow skin didn't seem to be the original color of the skin, but rather a layer of oil on the skin that reflected sunlight. Looking at it from different angles, the colors of the rainbow were constantly changing. It was a very strange oil. List, who had cast magic eyes, fed the rainbow whale another silver-striped fish, and then carefully examined its body. His body was filled with bluish-white magic power. This was the magic power of the water attribute. Basically, all the sea monsters in the sea should be of the water attribute. After all, they soaked in the sea all day long. That layer of grease was also filled with the color of mana, and it was very active mana that was constantly circulating. I feel like this layer of grease is some kind of magic. List wasn't sure, but that didn't stop him from communicating with the rainbow whale, communicating through food. It was said that dolphin-type animals had very high intelligence, second only to chimpanzees in terms of intelligence. There were even some theories that the killer whales of the dolphin family were smarter than chimpanzees. After all, humans were the overlords of the land while killer whales were the overlords of the sea. Both of them were overlords, so their IQ was naturally not low. Killer whales, like dolphins, are very friendly to humans. Wild killer whales have never killed anyone. After a few silver-striped fish, List felt that the time was right. He could not help but reach out and touch the rainbow whale's head. The rainbow whale didn't show any signs of resistance and allowed him to stroke its big head. So after a while, List felt that he had established a friendship with the rainbow whale. The smoke mission told me that the rainbow whale is a suitable mount in the water. Should I ride it for a spin? It doesn't seem very friendly to ride it directly. Why don't I dive into the water and ride it? He did what he thought. He first blew the horn to remind Ichi to protect him. Then he jumped into the sea with the silver-striped fish in one hand. Chirp. The rainbow whale immediately swam around List and touched him with its body from time to time, but it had no intention of attacking. Its small eyes stared at the silver-striped fish in his hand, but it didn't rush up to grab it. Seeing this, List already knew that he was halfway to success. He stuffed the silver-striped fish into the rainbow whale's mouth, then took out another silver-striped fish from the sampan and fed it to it. At the same time, he stuffed his waist bag full of silver-striped fish. Then he slowly hugged the rainbow whale, flipped over and rode on the rainbow whale's back. He grabbed its dorsal fin. His body was ready to be overturned. Unexpectedly, the rainbow whale didn't overturn him. It just remained still and made a strange sound, chirp, chirp. Its meaning was unclear. But List quickly took out a silver-striped fish and threw it in front of the rainbow whale. The rainbow whale jumped, bit the silver-striped fish and ate it. It slowly swam on the sea but still didn't shake off List. Sir Lord is so great. The serf who fell into the water was sitting on the sampan. He was so surprised that he couldn't close his mouth when he saw this scene. In just a short moment, the great Sir Lord rode on the sea monster. As expected of the great Sky Knight, even the sea monster was easily subdued. Then, he saw the Sir Lord riding the rainbow whale gradually go further and further away. Accompanied by the rainbow whale's chirp, and the Sir Lord's laughter, he finally disappeared from sight. So great. Riding the rainbow whale, List continuously made waves on the water surface. Although the waves splashed and drenched List, he still laughed happily. Riding a dog, a bird or even a dragon was nothing. Only riding a fish was the coolest. The rainbow whale had already finished eating the silver-striped fish in his pocket, but the friendship built by the silver-striped fish was already indestructible. The rainbow whale carried List and swam around. At this moment it let out a high-pitched cry, chirp, then it dove into the water. Before List could hold his breath, he also sank into the sea with the rainbow whale. He suddenly turned pale with fright and felt like he was going to choke. However, he didn't choke. Instead, his body was surrounded by an ice-cold texture, and he could breathe freely in the water. Breathing was not as comfortable as breathing on the water surface, but it didn't prevent him from obtaining oxygen. After recovering from his panic, he suddenly discovered that his body was glowing with a rainbow luster. This is the rainbow whale's magic? List froze for a moment, then immediately cast magic eyes and saw that, like the rainbow whale, there was a layer of active magic constantly circulating on his body. A moment later. Understanding this, List laughed heartily in the water. He simply loved this rainbow whale. It was a natural underwater mount that could actually help the knight breathe underwater. That layer of colorful grease was clearly a kind of magic, an unheard of magic. No wonder the smoke mission prompt and the rainbow whale were helpful for him to contract the giant kelp sprite. The rainbow whale's magic simply gave him the ability to move underwater. He no longer had to hold his breath until his face turned red, and he also had to frequently come to the surface to breathe. Very good. He couldn't help but pat the rainbow whale's back and shout, "Good job, rainbow whale. From now on, you will be my best mount in the water." With the protective layer of magic, he could already speak freely underwater, and there were no problems with his hearing and vision. Chirp. Chapter 542. When Ichi appeared, the rainbow whale had an extreme reaction. It turned around and tried to escape. However, after List comforted it for half an hour, it accepted Ichi's existence and was no longer afraid of the siren that had captured it before. Thanks to List, Ichi caught some small fish and threw them to the rainbow whale, which successfully dispelled its hostility towards Ichi. Food was always the best tool to communicate with animals. However, what touched List the most was that the rainbow whale didn't throw List off when it was avoiding Ichi, nor did it remove the protective spell on him. Bringing List with it to avoid a chi greatly slowed down its speed. Otherwise it could easily get rid of a chi. A chi was an ocean elf. She was much faster than regular fish, but compared to the rainbow whale she was still far behind. List suspected that the rainbow whale could reach a speed of 120 kilometers per hour. Even when carrying a person, it could reach 80 kilometers per hour. That was because a chi's highest speed was 80 kilometers per hour. Since you're a female rainbow whale, I'll call you Rose. As for why he thought of the name Rose, it was because when List rode the whale, the image of Jack hugging Rose from Titanic floated in his mind. It was just as cool. List called Rose's protective layer of magic the rainbow breathing membrane. Its main function was to breathe underwater. It seemed to use magic to collect oxygen from the seawater and provide it for breathing through the nose. It was a very special spell. List had never seen it in any magic books. It seemed to be a spell unique to the rainbow whale. A chi we can talk underwater now. List ate some food on the surface of the water to fill his stomach. Then he rode the rainbow whale to patrol the kelp forest. The rainbow whale really understood humans. List only needed to play with its dorsal fin. If he tilted it to the left, it would swim to the left. If he tilted it to the right, lifted it up, or pressed it down, it would swim accordingly. It seemed to like this way of interaction. It was probably because it was too lonely. Just like the mangrove elf Nami, loneliness made her take the initiative to get close to others. List hadn't met many draconic beasts, but both Loki the chocobo and Lolth the rainbow whale lived alone. He had never heard of this kind of dragon beast before. It was obvious that they were extremely rare. Even humans had not discovered them. Dolphins were social animals, but rainbow whales moved alone. It was obvious that they were lonely. Brother, Rose is so nice. A chi reached out and touched Rose's belly. Rose immediately let out a cheerful cry. Her cries in the sea were slightly different from her cries on land. It was deeper, but the same sense of cheerfulness could be felt. Hee 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 hee, let's go and meet that giant kelp sprite. The earlier we can form a contract with it, the more I feel at ease. With the seven-colored whale as his mount and the basic telepathy between them, List was confident enough to form a contract with this ferocious wild kelp sprite. Of course he still had to be careful. Because he couldn't release his combat energy on the back of the seven-colored whale. Once the combat energy gushed out, it would quickly break through the seven-colored breathing membrane, which would bring trouble to both List and the seven-colored whale. Probably because the seven-colored breathing membrane had been used for too long, the seven-colored whale was no longer used to holding its breath underwater. To deal with the giant kelp sprite, he would have to deal with it. With a chi leading the way, they quickly advanced deeper into the kelp forest. After a while, they arrived at the location of the giant kelp worm stalk. Brother, it's here. I see it. List motioned for Rose to stop and quietly observed the giant worm stalk in front of them. The roots of the giant kelp grasped the rocks in the deep pit. Just as a chi described, it was at least 2 to 3 meters thick and looked like a huge pillar. The worm stalk was 40 meters long and straight up. After 40 meters, it began to curl and grow along the shallow seawater. Almost a single worm stalk could form a forest. This suddenly reminded List of the legend of the Elven King. According to the legend, the Elven King was the end of the evolution of the dragon elves. The worm stalk was incomparably huge. A single worm stalk could form an entire forest. Even countless World of Warcraft, elves and dragons lived in the forest formed by the Elven King's worm stalk. The giant kelp sprite's worm stalk was much smaller than the legend of the Elven King. However, its huge body and densely packed leaves could indeed be called a worm stalk that could form a large forest. The area it expanded was at least as big as a football field. Previously, the giant kelp sprite's worm stalk was only as thick as a bucket, which was already extremely huge. Who would have thought that the giant kelp sprite's worm stalk would be so ridiculously huge? Brother, the big sprite is over there. A chi quickly found the giant kelp sprite and pointed it out to List. List looked in the direction of her finger and saw an infant-sized sprite holding a leaf of his worm stalk, swinging in the water. Using magic eyes, he could see the extremely dense magic light within its body. The jade powder was well prepared. He could boldly seduce the big sprite. List and a chi whispered to each other for a moment and decided to use the jade powder as the main temptation plan, which would last for half an hour. If they still couldn't deal with it in half an hour, then they would attack from both sides and capture the giant kelp sprite. List had chi and wasn't afraid of the giant kelp sprite's magic at all. Moreover, his snakeskin armor was very resistant to magic. Not only did he put on it, but he also put one on a chi. It was the first time for a chi to put on clothes, but to List's great regret, the opaque water belt around her body was still there. The leather armor was obviously a bit too big and did not fit her body. Moreover, wearing only one piece of leather armor looked very strange. In the strangeness, there was a trace of strange temptation. If it were any other time, List might have expressed his respect. But at this time he was more focused on the giant kelp sprite. After making preparations, he directly rode the rainbow whale to the giant kelp sprite. This successfully attracted the big kelp sprite's attention. Its hair stood on end, and the small palm-sized kelp on its head instantly stood upright. It immediately swam towards List and threw out a few rays of light, planting the giant kelp. The rays were very fast and couldn't be avoided, falling on the man and the whale. The seeds made of magic quickly burrowed into their bodies. However, the rainbow whale had magic to resist, while List had leather armor and chi. The seeds could only grow on the surface. Before they could grow to the length of a finger, List reached out and wiped them away. Just as I described, violent and fierce. List sprinkled a handful of jade powder and didn't fight back. He directly rode the rainbow whale away. The giant kelp sprite chased after him for a while. Seeing that it couldn't catch up, it swam back and began to search for the jade powder that had fallen on the rocks. List had half an hour to reach a stalemate with it. But no matter how much jade powder he sprinkled or how friendly he acted, he couldn't get a trace of gentleness from the giant kelp sprite. The only responses were gulp, onger, blada, and other unclear cries. Among them, a deep roar was the dominant sound. Big elves could speak, but this giant kelp sprite had no one to teach it, so it could only roar and shout meaninglessly. As time passed, List's patience was exhausted. List's face was calm. He slightly narrowed his eyes and finally made up his mind to change his plan. He shouted to a chi who was hiding in the distance, "Gentle means are useless. A chi, let's do it." Boom. A chi immediately turned into a white lightning bolt and rushed towards the giant kelp sprite. At the same time, she released a magic water vortex to disrupt the giant kelp sprite's movements. On the other side, the rainbow whale, under List's control, also rushed towards the giant kelp sprite excitedly. List did not use any fighting skills, nor did he take out any weapons. He just took out a fine-eyed fishing net from the gem space that he had long prepared, and covered the head of the giant algae sprite. A water archmage and a sky knight tried their best to capture the giant kelp sprite, whose alertness was almost exhausted. Obviously it wasn't difficult at all. The big kelp reacted fiercely and tore at the fishing net. Its teeth were very sharp and it tore the fishing net in a few bites. Just as it struggled to break out of the fishing net, List rushed over and grabbed the big kelp. Then, at lightning speed, he put his fingertip into its mouth and took a bite. He felt a sharp pain on his fingertip, and his finger was already bleeding profusely. If he hadn't been mentally prepared and pulled his finger out in time, it might have been bitten off by the giant kelp sprite's sharp teeth. However, this pain was soon replaced by a wonderful feeling of telepathy. It was as if his consciousness had been divided into two. One part was playing the role of List, who was suffering, and the other part was playing the role of the giant kelp sprite, who was experiencing a novel experience. Gulp! The giant kelp sprite was also stunned, its eyes filled with confusion. For a moment, it didn't know who it was and what it wanted to do. Chapter 543. This chapter is Dream of Ancient Jiangnan. The sprite contract could be regarded as a kind of strange contact magic. The main point of contact was the mouth of the sprite. As long as it bit any part of the human body, it could establish an unbreakable contract. There was no need to break the skin, just forceful contact. List did not know the principle behind it. Countless wizards, knight, and other researchers of the sprite contract also did not know the reason. Many wizards had expressed their views on the sprite contract in magic books, but there were not many with real evidence or opinions. However, Crazy Truth had previously provided him with a conjecture, which made him come up with his own inference. At that time, List had given her the sprite worm amber to study, providing her with ideas for breaking through to Great Wizard, and she had indeed made some discoveries. She believed that the sprite worm itself was a complex magic array, most likely composed of magic power in the form of a more advanced magic array. The forms of magic arrays range from basic magic arrays to ordinary magic arrays, and then to dynamic magic arrays, each more complex than the previous one. There had to be a higher level magic array above that, but Chris had no clue as to how to get to the magic shooter level. She could only guess that at the end of the magic array lay sprites or even dragons. In fact, List quite believed in this inference. The triangular theory of magic power, matter, and spirit could be very compatible with the structural theory of magic arrays. In particular, the whole process of him giving birth to the little fire dragon Leo was the best proof of the triangular theory. The sprite might be a touch-based magic array. A slight touch would activate the magic array, and a contract would be established. He looked at the confused giant seaweed sprite. List suppressed his excitement of having his first sprite and whispered to Achi, "I have some inspiration for magic arrays. Achi, later I will write a book called Triangle Theory and Magic Array Structure Unification Demonstration. You can help me refer to it." "Ah, big brother, what new discoveries have you made?" Achi could not keep up with List's train of thought. One moment he was contracting a sprite, and the next moment he was thinking of writing a magic book. "Forming a contract with this great sprite gave me inspiration. Achi will help you refer to it carefully." While they were talking, the seven-colored whale could not help but touch the confused giant algae sprite. It was very interested in sprites, but it had no intention of touching them. After being touched by it, the giant seaweed sprite shuddered and sobered up. "Go. Longer." Roaring, he started to cast spells on the rainbow whale. With a flash of light, countless giant algae grew out of the rainbow whale's body. The rainbow whale was so frightened that it twisted its body and wanted to scrape the giant algae off the rocks. After coming to his senses, List reached out and wiped the seaweed off its body. Then he communicated with the kelp sprite and used his emotions to control it. "Stop, kelp sprite. Don't cast spells." "Go." The giant kelp sprite turned its head and bared its teeth at List. "How dare you bare your teeth at me?" "Gulp. We've already made a contract. I'm your master, do you understand?" List wasn't angry. Instead, he felt that it was very strange. He was clearly connected to the giant seaweed sprite, and they could perceive each other's emotions very clearly. But the giant seaweed sprite was still not friendly to him. He could feel that the other's mind was in a mess. On one hand, the power of the contract made it unable to resist the pressure of their wills. On the other hand, it was indeed hostile towards List, an instinctive hostility towards an intruder. Looking at the snarling giant seaweed, he already understood that it lacked training. Like the great tulip sprite Fragrance, a domestic sprite, it was naturally close to humans. However, the giant seaweed sprite was a wild sprite. It had lived in the wild for who knew how long, and its wild nature had already taken over most of its instincts. Even the mental connection brought by the contract couldn't immediately eliminate its wild nature. Fortunately, at the very least, the contract could influence the giant seaweed sprite to stop attacking List or running away. As for how to tame it, it would depend on how patient List was. And so, decisively, he took out some jade powder and placed it on his palm, calling out to the giant seaweed sprite. "Stop shouting. Come and eat the jade powder. Remember, if you follow me, you'll never lack jade powder. This time is a greeting gift. The next time you roar at me, you won't be able to eat jade powder. You'll only get jade powder if you stop roaring." With the mental connection, it was very easy to communicate with the giant seaweed sprite. After understanding, it struggled and squirmed and finally gradually approached List. Standing on the rainbow whale's back, it lowered its head and began to eat the jade powder in List's hand. List stretched out his other hand and stroked the small seaweed on its head. It immediately raised its head and bared its teeth again. But List immediately communicated with it with an emotional message of, "If you dare to roar, I won't give you jade powder," which made it retract its mouth unnaturally. After struggling for a few seconds, it simply gave up on its dignity and focused on eating the jade powder, no longer caring about how List stroked it. After a few times, it even enjoyed List's stroking. With the binding of the contract, it's very easy to train it. List was in a good mood. Today was truly a great harvest. He had obtained a low-level dragon beast, the rainbow whale, that allowed him to breathe underwater, and successfully contracted a giant seaweed sprite. He felt as if he had reached the peak of his life. In his complacency, he couldn't help but say to Achi with a bright smile, "From now on, the land is mine, the sky is mine, and the sea is mine too. Hee big brother, with this big seaweed sprite, you'll definitely become an earl or even a marquis. I'll also become a dragon knight, establish a new country and ascend to the throne." Achi didn't doubt it at all. "Yes, big brother will become a king." The rainbow whale Lolth also chimed in. "Hiyo hululuyalu." Hearing the rainbow whale's cry, the giant seaweed sprite didn't even raise its head from eating the jade powder. With a wave of its hand, a ray of light grew on the rainbow whale. If it couldn't teach List a lesson, why couldn't it teach a fish a lesson? Mission complete. Reward, 1 giant seaweed sprite. The smoke mission had been completed as soon as he rode on the rainbow whale Lolth. Naturally, a new mission was also issued. Mission, The core secret of the giant seaweed forest has been found. The water mount has also been obtained. It is time to complete the final exploration of the giant seaweed forest, settle down the giant seaweed worm stalks, and replan the giant seaweed forest. Reward: a shell that produces pearls. After successfully contracting the giant seaweed sprite, List was ready to strike while the iron was hot. He wanted to finish the exploration of the giant seaweed forest as soon as possible and find the remaining sprites. He suspected that there were still sprites in this huge giant seaweed forest. After all, only half of the forest had been explored. Currently, every giant seaweed sprite was a strategic resource. Before preparing for the exploration, he didn't plan to bring the giant seaweed sprite along. First, he hadn't trained it well. The giant seaweed sprite still had a strong sense of resistance. Second, it wasn't convenient to bring it along. Unlike the lesser sprites and sprite worms, it wouldn't be directly and forcefully restrained by List. It would be bad if it saw the other sprites inside a cheese shell and started fighting. Only after List had thoroughly trained it could he meet the other sprites and bring them back to protect them. I'm going to give the giant seaweed sprite a name. The great seaweed sprite can already talk normally like humans, so it needs a name. List touched the small seaweed on the giant seaweed sprite's head and said, "I have 3 names here. Help me take a look." "Okay, go ahead, big brother." Chapter 544. Achi thought the name Loi sounded good, but in the end, List still rejected it. "For the sake of tradition, I'll call you Parker." The so-called tradition was the name of the mounts, World of Warcraft, elves, and dragons he had tamed along the way. All of them had the same style: Fire Dragon, Black Dragon, Dosen, Blessed Curls, Lightning, Ella, Nami, Loki, Mickey, Leo, Fitz, Tam, and Lolth. Therefore, the giant kelp sprite was called Parker according to tradition. Ghost Shadow Parker of Bloodport, a very fierce hero in League of Legends, matched the temperament of the giant kelp sprite quite well. "You'll be called Parker, remember?" "Go. You're called Parker, say it after me." List used his mind to communicate, pointed at it, and then said the serpentines. "Parker." Parker turned his head to the side, ignoring List. List smiled and took out a handful of jade powder. "Parker." Gulp. Parker stared at the jade powder, unable to move his eyes away. After a while, he reluctantly said, "Bye. Parker, it's Parker Parker." List clenched his fist, still smiling. "Parker. Parker, Parker." For the 3rd time, the giant kelp sprite finally clearly shouted his name, Parker. "Good boy, come, this is yours. I have something to do now, I'll leave for a while, I'll come find you in the evening." He handed the jade powder to Parker. List waved his hand, riding the 7-colored whale Lolth, and together with Achi, they left Parker and its huge worm stalk. When their figures disappeared in the giant kelp forest, Parker, who had been eating the jade powder with his head down, suddenly stopped. Instead, he raised his head and looked in the direction List had left. He was in a daze and no one knew what he was thinking. A quarter of an hour, maybe half an hour. Parker opened his mouth and softly shouted, "Parker." He continued to shout, "Parker. Parker. Parker." The shouting became louder and louder, and in the end he simply laughed and shouted, "Parker. Parker." He was excited to have a name. It had never thought of giving itself a name while living in the sea. Mimicking List's style, he pointed at himself and said, "Parker." Its voice was sharp, but the tone was pleasant to hear. It was just that the teeth in its mouth ruined the aesthetic. After shouting Parker for a long time, he even forgot to eat the jade powder in his hand. At this moment, a fish rushed over, seemingly wanting to taste the jade powder. But before it could eat, a ray of light flashed and countless giant seaweeds pierced out from the fish's body, tearing it apart. Parker turned his head. Looking at the remains of the dead fish, he roared, "Parker." When the other fish saw the tragic end of the fish and Parker's roar, they immediately turned around and ran away in fear. For a time, Parker was the only one left near the worm stalk. As it ate the jade powder, it returned to its worm stalk, rolled up a leaf and wrapped itself in it. A faint murmur could be heard, "Parker." Very soon, this place became the territory of all kinds of fish, prawns, and crabs. I can actually feel Parker's mood, like a happy child getting a toy. Shortly after List left, he sensed Parker's mood. He did not know why Parker was so happy. He did not see it like this when he gave it the jade powder. List shook his head and did not care too much. As long as it was not panicking when encountering danger, there was no need to care. With the rainbow whale Lolth, his search speed at the bottom of the sea increased by leaps and bounds. It seemed that there were still 10 to 20,000 mu of giant seaweed forest to search, but it was basically just a round trip. Magic eyes continued to operate. Despite the narrow field of vision underwater, the water was clear, and he could still see dozens of meters away. With a glance, he could clearly distinguish whether there was a magic retroaction or not, thus saving him the tedious identification process. In other words, Magic Eyes, this chi secret skill, existed to find sprites. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. A bit of magic retroaction light attracted him. He immediately urged Lolth to rush toward the light. Sure enough, it was a giant seaweed worm stalk with a sprite worm wandering at its roots. Without much to say, he sprinkled the jade powder, stretched out his finger and took a bite. The giant seaweed forest had contributed the 5th sprite worm. The appearance of this sprite worm proved that List's conjecture was correct. There were still sprites in the giant seaweed forest. Thereupon, he continued to energize himself and diligently explore every nook and cranny. In the evening, when he was about to return, he made a new discovery. This time, the worm stalk he found turned out to be the giant seaweed lesser sprite's worm stalk. The 3rd giant seaweed lesser sprite. The blessings came too frequently, continuously smashing my face. I need to go back and have a good rest. List used the old method and successfully contracted the lesser sprite. After thinking for a long time, he named it Eddie. Apart from continuing the tradition, he could not think of a suitable name for his mount, World of Warcraft, sprite, and dragon. Therefore, Eddie became a meaningless name. This was also probably related to the poor timing of its appearance. Who let Parker appear before it? With a greater sprite, List inevitably neglected the lesser sprite. Eddie was the icing on the cake after being smashed by the blessings. At this time he was already numb to it. He was too lazy to think of a nice name. Many greater aristocrats raised sprites without names, only using worm stalks as a code name. Now that he was gradually stepping into the ranks of greater aristocrats, there would be more and more lesser sprites in the future. He stuffed Eddie into a cheese shell and forbade it from fighting with Fitz and Tam before the 3 giant seaweed lesser sprites bared their teeth at each other. The wild nature of the sprites was suppressed. List called out to Achi and prepared to return. Riding on Loltha's back, he was a little absent-minded. As I continue to improve my strength, the number of sprites, mounts, and World of Warcraft will increase, and the companions I once cherished will gradually become marginal. In fact, I haven't cared about Fire Dragon, Black Dragon, and Lightning for a long time. Loki has replaced them. There was a touch of sadness. But this was life. Just like childhood toys, they would always quietly leave at some point. At least they can still enjoy the life they deserve in my territory and get the careful care of my servants. List put away his sadness. He was not a sentimental person. He was striving for his ideals. Soon they returned to the position of the giant seaweed sprite worm stalk and woke up the sleeping Parker. List stayed for a while, practiced saying Parker a few times and told Parker his name. List. He pointed to himself and then to the giant seaweed sprite. Parker. This time, Parker behaved harmoniously. It first pointed to itself. Parker. Then it pointed to List and said clearly, List. List suddenly smiled and pointed to the siren next to him. Achi. Parker's face suddenly changed and he looked like he was about to roar. Gulp. Achi was a little disappointed. But List quickly comforted her. Don't worry, Parker will slowly become familiar with you. Chapter 545. After teaching Parker for a while, the sun quickly sank to the sea level. List also had to return to Port Town and go back to land to rest, but he was worried about the 7-colored whale Lolth. Although they got along well today, it would be awkward if Lolth wandered around and couldn't be found the next day. So, he intended to entrust Lolth to Achi just like he entrusted all the sea elves to Achi. Lolth, follow Achi and don't run around. You will live in the Black Horse Island waters. I will treat you well in the future and Achi will take good care of you. Chirp. The 7-colored whale didn't know if it understood, but it was very cheerful. Originally, it was very hostile to Achi who was bent on hunting it, but now it had completely forgotten that it could accept Achi's hug and touch. When they arrived at the beach, List stood in the shallow water and waved to the 7-colored whale. The 7-colored whale did not dare to swim to the shore, but it swam in the shallow water, unwilling to leave and reluctant to part with List. It was not until List left the shore with the waiting servants that it reluctantly returned to the sea under the urging of Achi. Led by Achi, it swam to Mangrove Island. On the other side. When List returned, he was immediately greeted by Gort. This territory consultant has been in high spirits recently. His wife and children have moved from Coral City to Flower Town, and then he quietly moved his mistress, Freya, and illegitimate son, Donald, to Port Town. When they went to Flower Town, they were an old couple with 2 adult children. When they returned to Port Town, they were a young lover and a 2-year-old illegitimate son. The joy of family was endless. Sir, I heard that you subdued a sea monster at sea? It seems that you already know. Yes, it is a 7-colored whale and it has become my mount. I can ride it and swim in the sea. This vast sea is my back garden. List raised his eyebrows, looking very proud. It was indeed worthy of pride. Gort was surprised. Can sea monsters also become mounts? There's no difference between sea monsters and World of Warcraft. If I can ride World of Warcraft, I can naturally ride sea monsters. Consultant Gort moved his gaze away from the land a little and looked at the sea. Everything on land can be found in the sea. Magic potions, elves, sea monsters, and those pearls. I understand, sir. It's just that it's a bit too sudden. You actually found 2 lesser sprites and 4 sprite worms in the sea, and all of them are giant algae sprites capable of growing magic medicine giant algae. This is simply inconceivable. Your news is a bit behind schedule. I currently have 3 giant algae sprites and 5 giant algae sprite worms. Moreover, List kept them guessing. It couldn't be said that he was keeping them in suspense. Rather, he was considering the pros and cons of whether or not he should reveal the existence of the giant kelp sprite Parker right now. But after thinking for 10 seconds, he still decided to expose himself. The principle of not showing off one's wealth could be applied to little fire dragon Leo. As for a great elf, there was no need to be so nervous. As a Sky Knight, it was not a problem for him to obtain a great elf. Therefore, when Gort listened attentively, List said indifferently, I also contracted a giant algae sprite in the giant algae forest. The reaction was as expected. Gort almost jumped up. What? Sir, you were talking about a giant algae sprite? Great elf, that kind of great elf? List stuttered, full of astonishment and disbelief, and his eyes were filled with astonishment. No need to be surprised, it is indeed a great elf. It is not a sprite worm, nor is it a lesser sprite, but a great elf. List picked up the cup of green tea on the table and took a sip. Its name is Parker. Because it is a wild great elf, it has yet to learn to speak and needs time to adapt to human life. Yes, a wild great elf needs time. Gort swallowed his saliva. He had yet to recover from his astonishment. List called over his valet Thomas. Summon the town's officials, I want to hold a meeting. Yes, master. After a moment. Under the leadership of Marcus and Blair, the officials who remained in Port Town arrived one after another. List did not beat around the bush, directly saying, I called you here tonight because I have good news to inform you. Today I found a giant algae sprite in the sea, and the contract has been completed. The territory's first great elf has been born, and its name is Parker. Sir, did I hear wrong? Great elf. Giant algae sprite. Incredible. A great elf, how many magic ingredient giant algae can it produce? All kinds of astonishment and exclamations rose and fell one after another. The officials were all caught off guard by the news of a great elf, leaving them dizzy. Great elves represented greater aristocrats. Clans with great elves could easily accumulate military merits and be conferred the title of count. After all, great elves represented the accumulation of wealth. Aristocrats had to work hard for generations to cultivate great elves. Some marquis families only had 1 or 2 great elves. List was only a viscount who had been in office for less than a year. But he had already become a Sky Knight, and had even obtained a great elf that could grow magic ingredients. The future of such a lord was so bright that one did not need to use their brains to imagine it. And as followers, following a lord with a promising future, naturally had many benefits. At this moment, all the followers were thanking the knight for his grace, including the knight who had been incorporated. Imperceptibly, the loyalty of the followers had increased substantially. List was satisfied with the reaction of his followers, but he still maintained his usual aristocratic demeanor, indifferent to honor or disgrace and indifferent. I will send a knight to deliver a letter to Tulip Castle to set a time for the celebration. Teacher Marcus, I will leave this task to you. As you wish, sir. Marcus appeared excited. He knelt on one knee and performed the knight etiquette. Looking at List, who was sitting in the seat of honor and calmly drinking tea, he seemed to see the knight's glory draped over his student like a cloak. He was once a commoner student of Coral Island's Knight Academy. Although his strength was not at the top, he was also a cultivation genius among commoners. Later, after advancing to the elite Earth Knight, He was appointed by the Count to be List's tutor, responsible for teaching List knight cultivation. When they first met, he was full of ambition and was ready to assist List in his career. After all, he was not an aristocrat and was not qualified to follow the Count's heir Levis. The second son of the Tulip family was the best target for him to follow. The second son needed to constantly fight in order to obtain aristocratic qualifications. However, at that time List was just a youth with poor aptitude and a timid character. He was not favored in the Tulip Castle. Of course. In the end, List was still made a baron, eliminating the need to struggle. However, Marcus was not happy at all. He did not think that List would go to war and fight for glory. Following such a lord would not allow him to achieve his aristocratic goals. Before setting off for Flower Town, he was in despair several times. But he could not disobey the Count's orders. However, List, who came to Flower Town, seemed to have changed into a different person, maturing from the inside out. What was even more surprising was that, starting from raising the flying dust dog Dosen, the knight's glory was constantly sprinkled on the territory, sprinkled on the lord. In a year, the originally mediocre List grew into an elite Earth Knight at an astonishing speed and defeated him. In the following 2 wars, his performance was even more extraordinary. The first time he participated in the development order, he broke through and became a Sky Knight, stunning the entire Coral Island. It was conceivable that even in the entire Grand Duchy of Sapphire, there would be aristocrats talking about the 17-year-old Sky Knight List. This represented the rise of another aristocratic star in the country. Just today, the youngest Sky Knight contracted a great sprite. Those great aristocratic families needed several generations of hard work to produce a great sprite. List got it so easily, as if he had gone through the struggle of several generations in just 2 or 3 years. There is no other identity that can describe him except the Son of Glory. Marcus's heart was burning, full of expectations for the future. To be a follower of the Son of Glory, glory was within reach. He even couldn't help but think, as a Son of Glory, how long will it take for List to become an earl and how long will it take for him to become a marquis? He became a Sky Knight at the age of 17, will there be the possibility of riding a dragon in the future? Riding a dragon may be slim. Chapter 546. The sound of horses' hooves was urgent. The tall Tulip Castle was already in sight. Marcus couldn't remember how many times he had visited the most magnificent castle on Coral Island. Since following List, going in and out of Tulip Castle had become a common occurrence. He walked on the road leading to the castle. Soon, a patrolling night squad came to greet him. The captain, who was obviously an acquaintance, greeted from a distance, "Captain Marcus." "Captain Schiller." After explaining the purpose of the message, the night squad immediately escorted Marcus to the castle gate. He had been here many times. Each time he could feel that the knight's gaze on him had changed. When he first went to the Flower Town, there were mostly ridiculing and contemptuous gazes. Everyone thought that he had lost the qualification to compete for the aristocracy. Later, when he came with Dosen, some people started to be surprised. After Ella was born, she finally enjoyed the envious gazes. The knight knew what a lesser sprite meant. Then, after the Battle of Ironhoof Island, List became famous, and the knight's gazes on him became even more envious. Then, after the development order, they became even more envious. After today, what kind of gazes will you look at me with? Marcus tried to keep calm, but his mood was so good that he wanted to sing. Of course, he had never sung before. His personality had always been serious and rigid. Even if he had a lot of inner drama, he was still unwilling to show it. The new deputy butler received him in the castle. "Captain Marcus, what brings you here today?" "I brought a message for Sir Lord to give to Sir Count." It turned out to be a message from young Master List. "Please wait in the living room, I will go inform the master." The deputy butler left for a moment before returning. "Captain Marcus, the master is upstairs in the study. He invites you to go." "Thank you." When he arrived at the door of the study, Marcus tidied up his clothes. He was still in awe of the Count. After entering the door, he immediately performed the knight's etiquette. "Marcus pays respect to Sir Count." "Please sit down, Marcus." The Count sat behind his desk, motioned for Marcus to sit down, and then asked, "What message did List ask you to bring me?" The distance between Flower Town and Tulip Castle is such a short distance. Riding a chocobo, he can get there in an hour, yet he still sent someone to deliver a message. "The Lord is dealing with important matters on Black Horse Island and has no time to leave, so he asked me to deliver the message." "All right, go ahead." Marcus cleared his throat and said sternly, Sir Lord invites you and Madam to the Flower Town on April 14th to participate in the Great Sprite's birth celebration. At first the Earl did not react. After waiting for 3 seconds he suddenly came to his senses. What did you say? The Great Elf's birth celebration? Yes. List has a great sprite? Which elf evolved, Ella, Nami or Mickey? Ella and Mickey have just evolved, and it seems unlikely that they will continue to evolve. Is it the mangrove sprite Nami? The Count was very clear about List's sprite. Sir Count, the great sprite contracted by the Lord is not domesticated, but a wild great sprite. It is a giant kelp sprite. The Lord personally dived into the sea to explore the giant kelp forest composed of giant kelp, and found and contracted it. Its name is Parker. Marcus finished and added a few words. Parker was born in the giant kelp forest. In addition, the Lord also found and contracted 3 giant kelp sprites, named Fitz, Tam and Eddie, and 5 giant kelp sprite worms. 1 great sprite, 3 lesser sprites and 5 sprite worms? Even though the Count had been through a lot, he still opened his mouth wide. It took a while for him to recover from the shock. Marcus, tell me what giant kelp is. Is there a forest in the sea? Are these sprites in the sea? Yes, Sir Count. Giant kelp is a kind of plant that grows on the bottom of the sea. It is tens or even hundreds of meters long. They grow densely together like a large seabed forest. Those giant kelp sprites live in the giant kelp forest. Moreover, the Lord also found a large area of magic ingredient giant kelp. Magic ingredient giant kelp? The Count exclaimed again. Marcus rarely saw the Count, who had always been high and mighty, lose his composure. However, he did not dare to show a different expression and replied respectfully, Yes, there is a large area of magic ingredient giant kelp. The Lord has decided to expand the magic ingredient giant kelp in the sea and let all the giant kelp sprite worms cultivate the magic ingredient giant kelp. Stop for a moment. The Count waved his hand, then exhaled a long breath, leaned back in his chair and seemed to be lost in thought. After a while he recovered and his voice calmed down. The sprites in the sea, this is a very surprising discovery. It is indeed necessary to hold a celebration after contracting so many sprites that can grow magic ingredients. The Lord will be looking forward to the arrival of you and his wife in Flower Town. Don't look forward to it. I'm going to Black Horse Island. By the way, where was the giant kelp forest found? On the shore of Black Horse Island. You still have to inform the others. When you go back, tell List that I'm going to Black Horse Island the day after tomorrow to see the giant kelp forest and the great elf Parker in person. Yes, I will convey your arrival to the Lord. Marcus bowed and left the study. The study was quiet. The Count leaned back in his chair but fell into deep thought. He was also a person who had a contract with a great elf, although the great elf Xiangxiang had now been transferred to his son Levis. When he took over the contract from his father, Greg Tile, Xiangxiang was still a little elf. Then soon the news of his father's death on the battlefield came. At that time he was just an Earth Knight, working hard to become stronger, hoping to avenge his father. Shortly afterward, Xiangxiang suddenly broke through to become a great elf, and the family really ushered in the opportunity for development. Although he relied on his continuous development and war to be promoted to the Count, the foundation of the family was the cornerstone of success. Compared to List, he had almost no shortage of resources during his youth. However, now that he thought that List already had a great elf, 6 lesser elves and dozens of sprite worms, he felt deeply conflicted. On the one hand he was gratified that his son was favored by the knight, on the other hand, he was disappointed that his son had left him far behind. In terms of fighting he could not beat his talented son, and now he was afraid that he could not even match his son in wealth. The Tulip family had a great elf, 12 lesser elves and more than 100 sprite worms, but this was the harvest of more than 20 years of farming on Coral Island. The harvest of 3 years was simply not comparable to List's. Perhaps soon he will separate from the family. Melissa, if you could see List's current achievements you would be very happy. Your son has started a new family. The Count shook his head. Melissa had been dead for more than 10 years and should have been forgotten, but every time List achieved something, he could not help but think of his dead wife. Chapter 547. I just saw Marcus of Black Horse Island leave the castle. Why did he come here? Madame Marie walked into the Count's study, brought a cup of green tea and asked. She had recently been learning tea arts. List had sent a lot of tea from Flower Town, along with instructions on how to make tea. The Count appreciated the taste of green tea and had made green tea his daily drink. Madame Marie took the initiative to take on the tea-making skills. The Count, holding a teacup, said very calmly, "Liszt found some sprites from the sea and is going to hold a celebration. He invited us to attend on April 14th. Madame Marie was stunned. "There are sprites in the sea? Why not in the sea? I used to see a great sprite of the sapphire family on Blue Dragon Island. It was a water caltrop sprite that lived in a quiet lake. Large areas of water caltrops lived on the surface of the water. Since there are sprites in the lake, it is not surprising that there are sprites in the sea. The sea is so deep, how did he find it? I don't know. I plan to go to Black Horse Island the day after tomorrow. I haven't been to Black Horse Island since Liszt was knighted. I'll take this opportunity to visit it carefully." The Count said and remembered something. "Go and prepare a heavy gift. The protagonist of this elven celebration is a giant algae sprite." Madame Marie was shocked. "Ah, a great sprite?" The Count put down his teacup and seemed to understand his wife's thoughts. He put his hand on her shoulder and rubbed it. "Its name is Parker. There are also 3 giant algae sprites and 5 giant algae sprite worms. This is a nest of sprites. I was as surprised as you when I heard it. Considering that Liszt has the same luck as the Son of Glory, it does not seem difficult to understand. Dear, that is a great sprite. That is why I am proud of him." Madame Marie touched her chest and calmed her emotions. There was a complicated look in her eyes. "I still can't believe it, a great sprite. How many generations of the tulip family have struggled to have a fragrance? It can't be compared to illusory luck. Maybe we should also search the sea around Coral Island." "Of course I will do that, but the sea is different from the land. There are too many unknown dangers in the sea and it is difficult to develop. We can't throw civilians into the sea to farm." "Then how did Liszt develop those giant algae?" "I'm not sure. I'll know when I get there. You don't have to think too much about it. Prepare the gifts and if you're willing, come with me." "Me?" Madame Marie thought for a few seconds and shook her head. "Forget it. I'll wait until April 14th. You and your father should have a good chat. After all, you are a family. He must have a special method to obtain the elves of the sea. The tulip family will prosper because of this technique." Southeast of Black Horse Island. On the surface of the sea near the shore, sampans were shuttling back and forth, harvesting large amounts of giant algae. These giant algae had been tested and found to be non-toxic and edible. However, they did not taste good. Livestock and poultry could eat the giant algae, but they could only eat it occasionally and could not be used as a staple food. Moreover, 80% of the giant algae was made of water. Although it looked huge, it had shrunk after being dried. But even so, it was still a very important aquatic product, effectively alleviating the demand for feed in the territory's animal husbandry. The purpose of the fishermen harvesting giant algae on such a large scale was to open up a new magic ingredient giant algae planting area. There was no magic ingredient in the area of influence of Parker's worm stock, so Liszt had used the temptation of jade powder and emotional communication to persuade Parker to migrate his worm stock to the offshore area. Parker's worm stock could cover an area of more than 6,000 acres, almost covering all the offshore areas suitable for the growth of giant algae at once. Coupled with Fitz, Tam, Eddie's worm stock, and the original 5 giant algae worms, it could basically affect thousands of acres of the sea. The entire offshore area would be planted with the magic ingredient giant algae, and other areas would be left to ordinary giant algae to grow. It didn't matter if it grew well or poorly, ensuring the magic ingredient was the most important. A few kilometers away from the area where the fishermen harvested the giant algae, the sea was slightly rippling. Suddenly, there was a splash of water and a big colorful fish rushed out of the water, with a person riding on its back. It was Liszt, who was searching for the giant algae forest, and his new mount, Lolth. Phew. On Lolth's back, Liszt exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and said in a relieved tone, "It took a week to completely clean up the giant algae forest. Unfortunately, there were not many discoveries in the deep water area, only 3 giant algae worms. In total, we harvested 8 giant algae worms." In the last 2 days of searching, he had only found 3 giant algae sprite worms. The giant algae forest, which had an area of 36,000 acres, had bred a greater sprite, 3 lesser sprites and 8 sprite worms. It was definitely a huge treasure trove of the sea. Achi also surfaced. She looked at Liszt with a somewhat distressed expression. "Big brother, Achi's shell is in a mess. Fitz, Tam and Eddie are not honest at all. The 8 giant algae worms also often bully the kelp worm, the seaweed worm, the redstone flower worm, the horsetail worm and the black horn worm." Her shell was indeed very big, but unfortunately the giant algae sprites had a bad temper. Not only were the greater sprites savage, the lesser sprites vicious, even the peaceful and quiet sprite worms would occasionally show their tyrannical side. When a chi was not paying attention, they would always bully other sprite worms or make a move on each other. I will have people expand the Flower Town Seascape Villa into a small seaside castle specifically for the sea sprites to live in. Each sprite will have one room and no one will violate anyone else. A new castle will soon be built in the port town. At that time, Achi, you will also have your own room. Achi will also have one? Of course, you are my little sister. Although your identity cannot be exposed for the time being, but you will still be the castle's master. List said with a smile. Achi revealed a happy smile and asked, "Can Achi have a bigger magic laboratory?" Of course. All right, thank you, big brother. If it were not for the difficulty of building a building in the sea, I would even be willing to build you an underwater wizard tower in the sea. List made a bold statement. In any case, there was no need to realize it. Achi will be very satisfied with a bigger magic laboratory. How could List not dote on such a considerate little siren who knew how to save money? He motioned for Achi to stretch her head over and gently ruffle her beautiful blue hair. At this moment, Achi was like a kitten, squinting her big eyes and enjoying List's touch. The sea was so warm that even Lolth only uttered a soft sound, not wanting to disturb them. Quietly and attentively, List summoned the smoke mission. The mission had not changed, indicating that it had not been completed. The mission requirement was to place all the worm stalks and plan the giant algae forest. He had not yet had the time to place the giant algae worm's worm stalk that he had discovered today in the coastal waters. Thus, after a moment of warm interaction, together with Achi and riding Lolth, he swam towards the coastal waters. He had a complete plan and knew where to place the worm stalk. At the same time. Chapter 548. How is that possible? A sprite can be found in the sea, and a greater sprite with a group of lesser sprites at that. Impossible. Levis shook his head, still in disbelief. Marcus, who had delivered the letter, had already left, but the impact of the letter had yet to subside. Loria, who had already become slightly pregnant, was sorting out the account books. She had already assumed the role of the husband and wife's estate manager. Of course there are sprites in the sea. My father once found 2 swamp sprite worms in a river. If there are sprites in the river, then there must be sprites in the sea. I just don't know how List found the sprites in the sea. But they are greater sprites. Dear, aren't you surprised? What do I need to be surprised about? The Golden Barley family has 2 greater sprites. The Golden Barley family also has a greater sprite. Among my father's followers, several counts also have greater sprites. List is already the youngest Sky Knight in the country, so shouldn't he have a greater sprite? Loria had a matter-of-fact expression. Levis opened his mouth and almost choked. Almost all greater sprites are raised by domestic lesser sprites, but List's giant algae greater sprite is wild. This luck is too enviable. He is a son of glory. Of course I know that he is favored by the knight's glory, but my heart is a little unbalanced. Loria looked up at him. Levis, I know that you have been a genius of the Coral Island since childhood, while List has not been talented since childhood, which makes you feel unbalanced. But you need to accept reality. He is a Sky Knight, and even my father praised him for his bright future in his letter. Now, our business is provided by List, so you should learn to be grateful. Loria, don't get it wrong, we are the ones who provided him with the channel. If List was just the second son of an ordinary aristocrat, then as a channel supplier, we should certainly get more profits. Loria's tone was calm, but she dominated the conversation. But he is not an ordinary second son. He is a Sky Knight, a future greater aristocrat. My father believes that he will even surpass her father's achievements. This isn't quite possible. Father is a strong contender for the Marquis title. I cannot say for sure what will happen in the future, but my father's vision is not bad. The brilliance of List's genius shone even on the countryside serfs of the Coral Island. We cannot turn a blind eye to it. Regardless of whether he has a contract with a great elf or not, I intend to suggest that you and List renegotiate the division of the business. We can't take the biggest share anymore, we should at least split it evenly. Levis did not speak. He was reluctant to give up his share of the business. Luolia said calmly, Levis, you will inherit everything from the Tulip family in the end. What you need to do now is to train hard and break through to become a Sky Knight. Only in this way can we gain the upper hand in the confrontation with Madame Marie and stop the flow of resources to Lytton. If I don't have enough resources, how can I break through quickly? It is precisely because you don't have enough resources that you can compete with Madame Marie for resources and restrain Lytton. Liszt is your younger brother, you can rely on him. Lytton, however, cannot let him become the next Liszt. After Luolia finished speaking, she lowered her head and continued to calculate the accounts. Levis looked at his wife and suddenly felt a little cold. However, he quickly shook off this feeling and said, "You don't have to worry about Lytton. Liszt is a son of glory, but he is not. His talent is indeed good, becoming an Earth Knight at the age of 13, but that's all. Well, I will take care of the gifts and the business. You should concentrate on your training." In the small castle next to the Coral City, Madame Penelope was busy selecting potted plants. From time to time she would communicate with Elvira behind her. "What do you think of this pot of azalea? Does it look like it is going to breed a sprite worm?" "I can't see it." "Of course you can't see it. You don't have the Knight of Glory's favor. You can't even find a suitable companion, let alone a sprite worm." "Grandmother, how can you say that about me? Young lady, quickly find an aristocratic knight and marry yourself off, then I will be polite to you. Weren't you always worried about Liszt's marriage some time ago? Why are you suddenly targeting me?" Elvira had a depressed expression. "In the past, Liszt was a young man with potential and needed me, his grandmother, to worry about him. But now he is the rising star of the Grand Duchy's aristocracy. Naturally, aristocrats will come to his door to ask for a marriage alliance. Those aristocratic ladies will compete to be his wife, so there is no need to waste time looking for one." Elvira said, "But I can see that Liszt has no intention of looking for one. He is not in a hurry because he is still young and prioritizes his career and training. A talented and diligent aristocrat like him will never lack suitors. I believe that on your father's side, there are already many aristocrats communicating with him about children." This is also true. Now that Liszt has contracted a greater sprite that can plant magic ingredients, oh heavens, I can imagine how many aristocratic ladies would regard him as their Prince Charming. Perhaps the Grand Duke regrets not having a third princess. Don't casually tease the Grand Duke. Aren't there only you and me here? You should know that the Grand Duke may send someone to inspect Liszt at any time. Such a young man with potential should choose to pledge allegiance to the Grand Duke instead of following your father. With a greater sprite and being the youngest Sky Knight, he is enough to establish a new family and propagate the Tulip family. While speaking, Madame Penelope pointed at a potted sunflower and said to the servant, "Move this potted plant to the place with the best sunlight. It will be my gift to Liszt. Maybe a sprite worm is being gestated." Elvira rolled her eyes. "I don't see any signs of it breeding a sprite worm." "You can't, but Liszt can. Perhaps I should let him choose one himself." "Forget it, later he can come and pick my potted plant whenever he wants." "You are too biased. If you can strengthen the family, I will also be biased towards you," Madame Penelope said before suddenly sighing with emotion. "If your grandfather were still alive, he would definitely be very pleased. His son brought glory to the family with the surname Tulip, and his grandson is about to establish a new family. How glorious!" Liszt did not know that others were talking about him behind his back. Of course, even if he did not know, he could still guess the impact he had on others. A wild greater sprite was casually contracted just like that. Anyone would be green with envy and indescribable shock. However, with the continuous improvement of Dragon Chi and the continuous production of giant algae magic ingredients, his and the little charred dragon's strength had increased by leaps and bounds. They simply did not care about how others viewed them. Reaching the top, looking down at the mountains. That was probably the feeling. He rode the seven-colored whale Lolth, constantly rushing on the sea, commanding his officials, organizing serfs to harvest the giant algae, and burying the mature part of the giant algae magic ingredient in the harvested sea area, experimental planting. He was busy until April 13th. Only then did he thoroughly plan the sea area. After Port Town, Newport Town, Thorns Town, Horse Town, Green Tea Town, Grain Town, Red River Town, and Mushroom Town, he decided to build a ninth town, a giant algae town. This town will fully operate the giant algae industry and ancillary fisheries. Chapter 549. Quest completed. Reward, Pro-producing shells. Quest. The Mage Tower is about to be built, and the Magic Academy is about to start enrolling students. Crazy Truth is ready, but the magician assistant needed has not arrived. The Lord will solve this problem. Reward, Floating Fruit. The reward was issued and the new quest was issued. List looked at the changing smoke and thought for a moment. The shell that produces pearls is probably similar to the pearl oysters raised by the sapphire family? I don't know how strong this sea monster is and what kind of pearls it produces. It's time to find a magician assistant. But what does this floating fruit mean? It was probably some kind of edible fruit that drifted along the ocean. List guessed so. But it was unknown if it could be eaten. Now it was time to do the quest. In fact, he had sent a letter to Elk's son Truth, hoping to hire him as a teacher in the Magic Academy. However, Elk's son had discovered the charm of being a second-hand dealer. He didn't want to do any research or teaching at all. He just wanted to be free. Although he settled in Coral City, he often went to the outer islands to experience different customs and do business with all kinds of people. Of course, List was always his best customer. If he wanted to make money, he had to come to Flower Town. It was already difficult to do magic casting. Without so much magic, he was now mainly selling magic books. He even wrote to List recently to go to the Iron and Steel Ridge Kingdom. He contacted a magic gathering and went there to buy more magic books. Elk's son Truth was unwilling to come, Glanny Truth was stubborn, and there was also Mylisai Truth who was dead. In addition, there was a magician who cooperated with the Tulip family, but List couldn't recruit him. Let's contact Glanny. Although this guy is stubborn and self-righteous, he is very skilled in making magic equipment. With a great magician like Chris as bait, he probably won't refuse. Then we can recruit 2 more magicians from other places. That should be enough to support the Magic Academy. List immediately sent a retainer knight to contact Glanny, and then wrote to Levis, asking Levis to help recruit 2 magicians from the outer islands. List did this well. It was April 14th, and the celebration of the birth of the great elf was about to begin. Except for a few supervisors who stayed on Black Horse Island, other officials and knight had gathered in Flower Town. Under the guidance of Butler Carter, the servants of the castle were busy and orderly arranging the banquet. In the past 2 years, the castle had held many banquets and had accumulated a lot of experience. Therefore, everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. Although the commoners of the small town did not have a holiday, everyone received double their salary today to celebrate with Sir Lord. In the apple orchard in front of the castle, Dosen and Stupid Woman snuggled up to each other, lazily basking in the sun. The 8 blizzard beasts were locked in 4 cages and could not come out. Their destructive power was too strong. Once released, they would form a litter of dogs. Without List's restraint, it would be a disaster. In front of List, they were a well-trained blizzard beast squad. List turned around and left. They were fearless troublemakers and the servants could not stop them. Once, they even blocked the main road of Flower Town with rock thorns. It took the serfs a few days of effort to restore traffic on the main road. Now they have learned a new magic, rock grenades. As for the other 2 magic that Dosen knew, rock wall and stone armor, they have not yet learned and do not know if they can learn it. Their aptitude seems to be much worse than Dosen's. If Dosen is a mid-level intermediate World of Warcraft, then they are an inferior intermediate World of Warcraft, probably because half of their bloodline originated from Stupid Woman. Stupid Woman is just a low-level World of Warcraft flying dust dog. On the pasture further away, there were not many horses being raised. The horses originally raised in the castle had been transferred to the Black Horse Ranch. Only the caravan and the riding horses were still grazing on the pasture. The blind and lame groom, One-Eyed Barton, still took care of the horses dutifully. From time to time, he would brag to the 5 horse grooms behind him, "I have been to the Black Horse Ranch, where I have delivered many of the divine black blood horses. Even Lord Gort invited me to go to the Knight Academy as a horse teacher." Then he would sing praises for List. "The Lord is kind and great. He gave old Barton a good life. His greatness is like the sun, illuminating every corner of the territory. Even the great elves in the sea are subdued by him. Ah, what a great lord." With an aria ending, One-Eyed Barton was very satisfied with his lines. And the lord that he spoke of was as great as the sun. At this time in the Seascape Villa. After a few days of rushing work, the Seascape Villa has changed greatly. It was originally a small 2-story building, but now it has been expanded into a row of 3-story buildings, towering in the sea. They were all built when the tide was low. Rubber water can quickly solidify in a few minutes. It is simply a construction artifact. Rocks are inexhaustible. The blizzard beast produces a lot of rocks every day. Now some wealthy civilians in Flower Town have begun to buy rocks to build houses. They replaced wooden houses with stone houses, which are fireproof, soundproof and quite stable. However, rubber water is not sold to the public. They can only use ordinary grass ash and mud to solidify the stones. For a long time, The rubber output of the rubber trees could not meet the needs of the territory's infrastructure. Even if every month Liszt would let the triplets of the rubber worm exert the power of the 3 phases to restore the rubber trees. My lord, the seaside castle has been built. You can let the elves live in it? Isaiah came over and reported. Liszt nodded. He took out a whistle from his pocket. The whistle was his latest invention. Of course, he just came up with an idea, and the rest was left to the carpenters in the carpentry workshop to figure out. After constant exploration, they finally designed a whistle that could be blown very loudly. This is a cylindrical whistle, not the kind that looks like a snail. He held it in his mouth and blew it. Suddenly, a sharp sound pierced the sea. After dozens of seconds, a huge colorful fish came to the beach along the artificially dug ditch. It was the 7-colored whale, Lolth, who could already understand the whistle. Liszt turned over and rode it, diving directly into the sea in front of the eyes of many officials and serfs. Many people who saw Liszt riding the 7-colored whale for the first time let out exclamations one after another. But not too long after the exclamation, Liszt had already ridden the 7-colored whale and emerged from the sea. He rode all the way to the seaside castle. The officials entered the seaside castle one after another. Then they saw Liszt with 1 big and 4 small elves on him, holding a handful of sprite worms in his hand. He turned over and got off the back of the 7-colored whale. Along the steps in the sea he put the elves into different small rooms in turn. Elves are very wonderful, they actually spend most of their time sleeping. Even if they have a personality, it will be constantly smoothed out in the contract, and eventually, they will not be able to resist the master's orders. Liszt ordered them to stay in their respective rooms and built beds with jade stones, which was enough to let them settle down. Each room had a side installed with glass for viewing and to ensure that the elves were in good condition. The officials stood in front of the glass, gesturing at the elves. That is the giant kelp sprite Parker. Sure enough, it is beautiful. I have seen Tulip Castle's great sprite sweet fragrance. Parker is as beautiful as it. Its teeth have a bit of a personality. So many elves, all born from giant kelp, amazing. Praise sir, praise the giant kelp. Parker is the embodiment of knight's glory, only Sir Lord can be favored by it. Amidst the praises, Liszt had already taken a bath in the next room and changed into a fitted frack abbey. Just then, a retainer knight rushed over and reported to him, Sir, Tulip Castle's carriage has entered the main road of the Thorns Ridge and will soon arrive at the castle. Lead them directly to the seaside castle, I will wait for them here. Yes, sir. 20 minutes later, the carriage slowly arrived at the oyster settlement along the main road. Madame Penelope, the Count and his wife, Levis and his wife, Olvera Lytton and the others alighted one after another. Grandmother, father, Madame Marie, Levis, Rolia, Olvera Lytton, welcome to the celebration of the birth of the great sprite Parker. Oh Liszt, my lucky boy, grandmother can't wait to see the great sprite Parker. Chapter 550. The waves washed over them and the thick transparent glass blocked the seawater. The elves were soaking in the seawater, sleeping soundly. The crowd of visitors stood behind the glass, chattering in admiration and comments. It was a bit similar to the underwater glass passages in marine parks. Look what a beautiful big elf. Parker, Parker, it looks so round but it doesn't have wings. Madame Penelope said with a smile. Olvera then said, elves are the most beautiful creatures. They are like huge gems, more beautiful than gems. No wings but fins. Is this the difference between sea elves and land elves? Levis stretched his head, wanting to get closer to the glass to take a closer look. At this time, Parker seemed to feel movement outside the glass from the soundproof room. He got up while rubbing his eyes in a daze. When he turned around he saw a large group of people peeping at him. He suddenly became furious and opened his mouth to curse. Gulu, Anjur, this mouth. Its fangs were exposed. Madame Marie exclaimed on the spot, How can its teeth be so sharp? Liszt, while shouting at Parker's unfriendly behavior in his heart, explained with a smile. A mouth full of fangs is indeed not very beautiful, but they are wild elves. Having sharp teeth is probably better for them to protect themselves. After all, there are countless dangers hidden in the sea. Even we humans can't survive there, let alone elves. Don't care what its teeth look like. It is a big elf, and its value is the most important. Madame Penelope gave Madame Marie a contemptuous look, pulled Liszt, and said with a gentle smile, Grandmother has seen these elves. You have brought too much glory to the family. Liszt said modestly, the knight is blessed by glory. I just went for a swim in the sea and encountered them. This was a joke. But it caused many people behind him to have a toothache. Only Rulia laughed. Because you are the son of glory, these elves took the initiative to appear in front of you and accept your contract. I think so too. The elves obviously didn't have to visit for too long. 15 minutes later, under List's lead, everyone left the castle by the sea. Then he watched as List used the whistle to command the rainbow whale Lolth to play on the beach for a while, exclaiming in admiration that it was beautiful, magical, and glorious. Before he knew it, it was already 11 o'clock. The sun rose into the sky and the temperature began to rise. The group returned to the carriage and returned to the castle. There were not many guests invited to the celebration of the great elf's birth, mainly List's own followers and members of the Tulip family. The other nobles were the Count's followers and List did not want to rope them in. Now that he was a Sky Knight, he could leave the Count at any time and pledge loyalty to the Grand Duke. After all, Lee William's title had limited List's future. Even if he did not take the initiative to leave, the Count would have persuaded him to do so. In the living room on the second floor, there was only the family and Gort, the Lord Knight who was there to lighten the mood. The first floor was a lively place for the territorial officials and Knight to chat. Madame Penelope drank the best green tea that List had brought out for her. The old lady didn't seem to like green tea. She only took a sip and put it down. She asked List very solemnly, "My young man, you already have your own great elf." Usually, nobles who have their own great elf will choose to change their surname and start a new family. For example, in Rolia's grandfather's generation, the Golden Wheat family was divided into two families, the Golden Wheat Ears and the Golden Wheat Grains. What do you think? Levis directly interjected, "You can change your surname to Giant Algae family. It sounds very wonderful. My dear brother, in the blink of an eye, you can already start a new family." Giant Algae family, List Giant Algae, I also think it's pretty good. Olvera echoed. Even Lytton said, "If those giant algae are really dozens of meters long, Big Brother's Giant Algae family feels really domineering." List smiled. Then he responded faintly, "Grandmother, when Father visited Black Horse Island the day before yesterday, I talked to him about it." He glanced at the Count. The Count also nodded in time. List has his own ideas. "I don't intend to change my surname, and I have no idea of starting a new family for the time being. After all, I am still very young and I want to stabilize my foundation first. Father said that the Grand Duke may have sent someone to inspect me. Maybe in 2 years I will be loyal to the Grand Duke. At that time we can talk about the surname and family." He did talk to the Count in detail. 3 days ago the Count boarded Black Horse Island by boat. List accompanied him around Black Horse Island, visiting various small towns, diving into the sea and enjoying the giant algae forest. The father and son also talked a lot. After all, the Count knew that he was not List's opponent, and he had already regarded List as an equal in his mentality. Especially when he saw the prosperous development of the Black Horse Island territory, the magic-driven Black Horse Kiln Factory and Glass Workshop, the gray-white Mage Tower rising from the ground, the handsome black blood horses. Everything had given him a deeper understanding of his second son. "I know you are hiding a secret. Is there anything you want to tell me?" Standing on the dock of Giant Algae Town, the Count asked with emotion as he looked at the sampan carrying giant algae in the distance. The situation of Black Horse Island. As long as someone investigated a little, they would know that there were many obvious places where the situation stood out. List did not hide much, so he was not surprised by the Count's question. "I do have some secrets or luck. Father, do you believe in the Son of Glory?" "I don't believe that the glory of the night can favor a person, but hard work is the key to glory. Compared with most humans who believe in the glory of the night, Lee William, as a veteran holy swordsman, sees problems more clearly and understands the essence of things." List said the words he had prepared. "When I first came to Flower Town, I mistakenly ate a poisonous fruit in Thorn's Ridge and almost died. This is my negligence, I used to ignore you too much. These are all in the past. In fact, I got a blessing in disguise. Not only did I survive, but it also triggered some changes in my body. My innate talent was completely revealed and most importantly, my eyes could sense magic. So, as you can see, I found a lot of elves." "Oh, is that so?" The Count was surprised. He had thought about all kinds of secrets of List, but he did not expect it to be such a secret. List nodded. He could not reveal the secret of the smoke mission, which involved too much. After all, it was related to the smoke dragon. It was also impossible to reveal the secret of the gem space, which also involved the invisible dragon. The little fire dragon Leo could not be revealed. Perhaps the Count would keep the secret for him and even be willing to sponsor him to ride a dragon. But there was no guarantee that the Count could really keep the secret. In case Madame Marie found out and in case she accidentally leaked it. There would definitely be people who would quietly sell the secret of the fire dragon for their own benefit. At that time Liszt would be in big trouble. Even though he was not afraid of people coming to the door, he could ride the colorful whale Lolth and wander the world at any time. But Black Horse Island could not be kept, and his efforts over the years would be in vain. So, choosing other secrets to distract the Count's attention was the best way. He could not hope that the Count would always ignore the abrupt phenomena on Black Horse Island. Just like the potion giant seaweed, he could choose to hide the news of the great elf, but the constant production of potions could not be hidden from the attention of people, and it would eventually be exposed. Instead of waiting for the future to be passive, it was better to actively guide interference. It just so happened that the Count was coming to Black Horse Island for sightseeing, so he took the opportunity to guide him. He originally intended to throw out the magic eye secret technique, but in the end he was not willing to do so, so he said that his eyes were mutated. Finally, the Count chose to accept this statement. This is a mutation that others dream of. Perhaps I should not deny the Son of Glory. The changes that have happened to you are in itself the deep blessing of the Knight's glory. Liszt, you will create a big family that surpasses the Tulip family. Father, I hope to help you become a marquis. After that, I will work hard and strive to become a marquis myself. Liszt smiled. This was not without the subtext of the deal. The Count no longer delved into his secrets, and he helped the Count fight for the marquis title. Of course, the main reason was that Liszt did not like the surname Giant Seaweed. Chapter 551. The Count stayed on Black Horse Island for half a day, exchanging a lot of information with Liszt about the sea elves before leaving. Liszt did not choose to hold back. Developing the sea was very difficult for people today. Without a mount like the seven-colored whale, and without a siren sister like a chi, diving could only be done near the coast. However, it was almost impossible for a sprite worm near the coast to be found by diving. Without the magic eye, looking for worm stalks with the naked eye was tantamount to looking for a needle in a haystack. In fact, according to the Count's introduction, many great aristocrats are aware of the existence of sprites in the sea, but few people are willing to develop them. The plants that sea sprites grow are also in the sea. How much technology, manpower, and material resources are needed to farm in the sea? Moreover, most of the algae in the sea seem to have little value apart from being used as livestock feed. If there were no magic giant algae found in the giant algae forest, just ordinary giant algae would not be worth Liszt's effort to develop. It would be better to spend more effort on farming on shore than to cultivate giant algae. But with the magic giant algae it was different. Spending a little more to plant the magic herb in the sea would still yield huge benefits, not to mention that the production of the magic giant algae was very large. So in summary, there was no one else besides Liszt who could develop sprite worms in the sea. Of course he was not afraid of exchanging his skills. In short, the Count circled Black Horse Island. The travel experience was probably not that pleasant. 3 days later, at the celebration of the great sprite's birth, his impression of the giant algae sprite Parker was also not so good. It was not that Parker's teeth destroyed his whole face, nor was it that Parker's value was not great. But thinking that the sea sprites could not be developed, and it was almost impossible to find a giant algae sprite like Parker, he was depressed. Before boarding Black Horse Island, he came with excitement. Although Madame Marie urged him behind the scenes, he himself was eager to have a new source of sprite worms. Unfortunately, only his son had the benefits. Why can't I meet a sea monster mount in World of Warcraft? He was still complaining about how amazed he was when he heard Liszt talk about the magic of the seven-colored whale Lolth, the seven-colored breathing film. It allowed people to breathe in the sea. This was completely trampling on the sea like it was land. The fire of jealousy burned in the Count's heart. Unfortunately, the other party was his second son, so he couldn't directly snatch it. Even if it wasn't his own son, it seemed that he couldn't beat Liszt at all. Loki flying in the sky, Rose swimming in the water, plus a group of blizzard beasts, this person alone was a legion. Therefore, he could only patiently lean against the back of the chair and continue to listen to Liszt's seemingly casual conversation. But in fact, he was showing off. At this moment, the whole family was talking about Liszt's new castle. Liszt said, I plan to build a 5-story castle because Black Horse Island is flat and there are no steep cliffs to rely on as barriers, so I can only build it taller. Although it's a bit empty for me to live in such a big castle alone, You can also go to my castle for a vacation. Have you thought of a name for the castle? Loria asked. I haven't decided yet. Call it Kelp Castle. Like Tulip Castle, it's the name of a great elf. Vera suggested. List smiled and denied, actually I prefer to call it Thorn Castle. He snapped his fingers and suddenly there was a cry of wow in the castle. The next moment, the thorn sprite Ella had flown over and landed on List's shoulder, yawning. He continued, Parker is a sea elf. It doesn't like to live in a castle and Ella is my first elf. It makes more sense to name the castle after it. Wow. Ella didn't know what List was talking about, but it didn't prevent it from echoing List's words. Of all the elves, List liked Ella the most even though Ella had a bad temper. This was his first elf, and he personally felt its unyielding attitude towards fate. The thorn's worm, which was never valued, broke out of its cocoon and became a butterfly, and turned into a little elf who planted magic potions. He still remembered the shock of seeing Ella stretch out her hand from under the gray fat pupa of the thorn's worm. He was used to Ella rudely turning over his food at every banquet, eating and throwing it away. Ella was not the most precious of the elves, but in his heart, it was the most special. Lady Penelope looked at Ella and pretended to sigh. Oh, my poor Parker, not only did it not become a family name, but even the castle doesn't have its name. She was a little unhappy that List didn't change his surname, create a new family and gain glory. Let's call the castle Thorn Castle. List didn't want to discuss it anymore. But after the port town develops into a city, I can name it Kelp City. There was no need to elaborate on the liveliness of the luncheon. Amidst the compliments of the night's glory, the delicacies were served to the table in turn. After the meal, the crowd also enjoyed a brand new stage play, The Loyal Hymn of the Valsai Knight, in which Avril Mask played the heroine and left a deep impression on everyone. There was a burst of applause. Lady Penelope in particular, liked this new form of stage play very much. It's so beautiful. Compared to those monotonous burlesques, this kind of play is more moving. It's the same art as piano music. I want to stay here and watch their performances every day. List responded, this is a play choreographed by the Black Horse Island Drama Company. For the time being, they are still working hard to train the newcomers. After a while, when the performances mature, I will let them go to Coral Island to perform. You can watch their wonderful performance at home, as well as a richer repertoire. That's great. I can't wait to see them perform on Coral Island. Lady Penelope said, asking her servant to grab a handful of copper coins and throw them on the stage. This was the main income of the burlesque show, which relied on the audience's rewards. However, List was not going to charge in this way. He chose to rent a house and transform it into a theater, build a large stage indoors, and then sell tickets to the public, taking the high-end route. After watching The Loyal Hymn of the Valsai Knight, the celebration of the birth of the great elf was officially over. List personally sent the convoy away from the castle. He knew that the name Parker would quickly spread throughout Coral Island and to more distant islands with the departure of the convoy. Chapter 552. This chapter is a reward for the leader of the Alliance, Slacker Man. 1 chapter for now, 10 more chapters in the future. Peace was restored in the territory. The officials and knight all returned to their posts. Apart from the commoners who received double their wages, they also praised the leader and great elf Parker. The influence of the giant kelp sprites had subsided. After the afternoon nap, List rode the chocobo Loki to a remote place to drink potions with Charmander. Crazy's endless supply of giant kelp potions really made the man and dragon happy every day. Scorching sun stab. In the air, List became one with his sword and crashed to the ground. His surging chi smashed into the ground like the sun. Huge flames shot out in all directions, burning a huge pit in the ground. Bathed in flames, List maintained a half-squatting position, calming his sudden burst of chi. Roar. Charmander Leo, circling in the sky, saw List covered in flames. He folded his wings and landed on the edge of the pit. Then he opened his mouth and spat out a faint yellow flame dragon breath. The dragon breath instantly enveloped List's body. But it didn't cause him any harm. Instead, it constantly permeated his body, helping him expand the capacity of his cells. This was the newest training method that List and Leo had come up with. He named it, Dragon Breath Body Refinement. He named the training method of excreting impurities after becoming one with the dragon, Demonic Dragon Chi Refinement. Demonic Dragon Chi Refinement was to upgrade Dragon Chi, while Dragon Breath Body Refinement was to expand the capacity of his cells. Two different training methods, but both were constantly increasing List's strength. Even though he didn't get the Grand Duke's Dragon Knight Chi manual, he still figured out how to train as a Dragon Knight. Actually, it couldn't be said that he figured it out alone. Demonic Dragon Chi refinement was a function of Charmander. As for Dragon Breath body refinement, there was one time when Leo took the initiative to spit Dragon Breath at him. At the time, List was shocked, thinking that Leo was trying to kill him. In the end, it was a false alarm. He discovered that Dragon Breath had the properties of a magic potion, helping him expand the capacity of his cells. So now, List basically gave all the magic potions to Leo to ingest, and then Leo would help him refine his demonic Dragon Chi and refine his body with Dragon Breath, striving to become a Dragon Knight. Unfortunately, Leo was still too young and had very little Dragon Breath. After spitting for a while, it hung its head dejectedly, looking exhausted. Catch. List stuffed 10 giant algae potions into its mouth. Charmander, who had been dejected just a moment ago, suddenly became spirited again. It stamped its legs and rushed into the sky. After circling around for a while, it suddenly turned into a ball of flames and rushed into List's body. List shook his clothes that had turned to ashes and said threateningly, "You're full of vigor when you're taking pills, but you're sneaky when you're helping me cultivate. Leo, you can't escape. Being ridden by me is your destiny." Leo roared in disdain. List just chuckled. No matter how clever the small Charmander was, it was still just a young dragon. No matter how cunning a fox was, it could not beat a veteran hunter. Now that he had sketched the List Dragon Taming Manual in his mind, sooner or later, he would create a dragon riding masterpiece that was more detailed than the Dragon Knight Chi secret manual. It would be passed on to his heirs from generation to generation. After changing into a new set of clothes, he whistled. Clatter. Not far away, Loki, who was grazing, strode over with its long legs. It would not refuse to be ridden by List. List rewarded it with a handful of top-grade wheat grains. List ordered, "Let's go home." Early the next morning, Glanny Truth tidied up his magic experiment tools and took a carriage to the Flower Town. He had accepted the recruitment of the Magic College to serve as a magic equipment class teacher and teach the first batch of Magic College students. List received Glanny. He still showed respect to the stubborn wizard. "Mr. Glanny, then I will have to trouble you with the teaching of the Magic College. Viscount, please rest assured." Glanny looked aloof, but in the face of List, who was promoted to a Sky Knight, he knew to maintain the proper etiquette and spoke politely. "Take a boat to Black Horse Island, someone will receive you. The Mage Tower has just been built, and the Magic College is on the first floor of the Mage Tower. Your daily life will be arranged by a special person in charge. I hope you will have a good life on Black Horse Island." "Thank you for the trouble, Viscount." Glanny did not stay in Flower Town and took today's merchant ship to Black Horse Island. Unfortunately, only one wizard had arrived, and the other 2 wizards who had accepted the recruitment had not yet arrived at Coral Island, so the smoke mission was still uncompleted. He did not know what kind of floating fruit the reward would be. He practiced multiple arrows in the apple orchard. He pondered for a moment the triangle theory and magic array structure unification demonstration. He was not a wizard, but this was the second magic book he had created. The last book, Tri-State Magic Array and Reality Interaction Theory, was praised by Chris Truth. "According to the clues I have now, the products formed by magic should be independent of the material sequence, or independent of the physical category, and included in the separate category of magic." He wrote a string of characters on the blank thick bast paper. Magic molecules, runes, magic arrays, and magic elves and dragons. In his mind, magic molecules are the basic units of magic. Magic molecules are arranged and combined into runes, and runes form magic arrays and construct various magic. Different levels of magic arrays have different power and effects, and higher levels of magic arrays are likely to be magic creatures. The so-called magic creatures include World of Warcraft, elves, dragons, sirens, and so on. Even wizards are considered artificial magic creatures. They are all direct users of runes and magic arrays. The difference is that World of Warcraft and the body of a wizard belong to the physical category, but they also have the ability of magic. Elves, dragons, and sirens not only have the ability of magic, but even their bodies also belong to the magic category. The body of a dragon is producing all the time, and the same is true for elves. Even the siren Chi is very different from human beings, and seems to be an incarnation of magic. Perhaps there are 2 sets of basic rules in this world, one is the physical rules, and the other is the magic rules, which interfere with each other and are independent of each other. Coupled with the spiritual rules in the middle, this strange world is formed. This is the theme I want to elaborate. For a time, ideas flowed. After the historical inventor's masterpiece Dragon's Fight in the Wild was completely stalled, the Piano King's famous Liszt piano music collection temporarily subsided, and after the small test of tri-state magic array and reality interaction theory, and Liszt's Earth Codex, he became a magic theorist again. He devoted himself to the creation of triangle theory and magic array structure unification demonstration. The 30,000-word masterpiece finally came to an end today. Looking at the 15 pages of thick bast paper with stale ink and more than 9 sets of hand-drawn schematics, he was very satisfied. He was going to give it to a Chi for reference first, wait for her opinion to come out, make slight revisions and then give it to Chris for reference. Chapter 553. This chapter is for the headmaster. Falling leaves. Yes. 1 chapter for now and 5 more chapters in the future. When Liszt arrived at the seaside castle, he happened to find a Chi talking to Parker. He had to say that the elves were easy to coax. After only a few days of contact, the jade powder was in place, and Parker no longer resisted a Chi. Even Lolth, the rainbow whale, could play around the seaside castle without being attacked by Parker. Not to mention the 3 little elves, Fitz, Tam and Eddie, who were already excited to see a Chi. It made Liszt suspect that if the contract could be revoked, these 3 little guys might quickly fall into a Chi's arms. Liszt! Liszt! Parker shouted when he saw Liszt. Liszt crossed the glass door and stood on the shore of the room. He waved to Parker. Parker, study hard. Parker grinned, showing off his teeth in a dramatic way. He pointed at Liszt, then at a Chi and then at himself. Liszt, a Chi, Parker, a family. Then he pointed to the rainbow whale Lolth outside and said disdainfully, Lolth, a fish. Lolth is not a fish, she is a rainbow whale, a dolphin, a mammal like humans. Liszt wanted to say that. But when he thought of the magic in this world, the abundance of species far exceeded that of Earth, and it was even more magical. It seemed that there was no point in dividing them in detail. There was no need to investigate whether the rainbow whale was a fish or a dolphin. He waved his hand and motioned for Parker to play, then prepared to take out his magic masterpiece for a Chi to study. But a Chi was the first to speak. Brother, a Chi found a group of large shell sea monsters at the bottom of the sea near the rocky island. When they opened their mouths, there was a large golden pearl inside. As she said that, she controlled the water flow and a light golden shell about the size of a wash basin swept over. Seeing the shell, Liszt quickly cast magic eyes. He could clearly see that the shell was glowing with bright magic light. It was another shellfish sea monster. Brother, be careful. Can release magic water bomb. It's a little dangerous. A Chi quickly added. However, there was no need to remind him about this. Liszt, who had the eye of magic, could clearly see the flow of magic on the sea monster's body, and thus determine whether or not to release magic. He picked up the light golden shell and threw it into the room. Then he pulled out the sky-slashing greatsword, aimed at the gap in the shell and stabbed it in. The gap in the shell was very tightly closed and the closing force was very strong. However, Liszt's Dragon Do Chi revolved, forcibly stabbing the sky cutter greatsword in, and then with a forceful pry, the 2 pieces of shell fell apart in a split second. Even the flesh of the shell inside was torn apart. Liszt didn't even cast a single spell before the golden shell was brutally killed by Liszt. However, although it was dead, the golden pearl in its body was perfectly revealed. Using the blade of the sword to gently cut open the membrane that wrapped it, a round golden pearl that was as big as an adult man's fist blossomed with a brilliant luster, as if it was a ball made of pure gold. There was only one, but the rich bluish-white magic power already showed its value. This is probably the reward of the last smoke mission, a shell that produces pearls? Liszt already understood in his heart that this group of shells that a Chi found was the mission reward that came late. Liszt looked at the dead shell. He found that the flesh inside the shell had golden lines in the gap, like lips. Golden lip clam. Golden pearl. It only took him 3 seconds to determine the name of the shell and the name of the pearl it produced. There were very few official records of sea monsters, and almost any sea monster encountered was a new species, and the naming rights were in the hands of the discoverer. A Chi was this golden lip clam found on the seabed near Stony Island? As a woman, a Chi's eyes sparkled as she looked at the pearl. Yes, brother, don't you think its pearl is beautiful? It's golden, as beautiful as the black pearl of the giant clam. It's really beautiful, but I don't know what its function is. I have to study it carefully. If the value is high, the territory will have another specialty. Even if the pearl is worthless, the sea monster meat is also very nutritious. Giant clam, pink conch plus golden lip clam. All of them were specialties. Unfortunately, the technology to breed and mine them had not yet been explored. The fishermen could only do some auxiliary work or plant gravel for the giant clam. The serfs were powerless to deal with sea monsters like the pink conch that could release magic. To mine them, a chi or list had to do it themselves. The same was probably true for the golden lip clam. However, as long as the value of the golden pearl was great, List would not feel tired even if he had to mine it himself. List put the golden pearl aside for the time being. He took out his magic masterpiece, demonstration of the unification of triangle theory and magic formation structure, and handed it to a chi. This is my guess about the magic system. There may be some data misquoting or logic errors that I haven't found. Please help me refer to it. Okay. A chi was now a water-great mage. Although she had progressed by relying on her talent rather than on the accumulation of knowledge, she still read a lot of magic books seriously. Unlike List, who read magic books, he specifically picked those that recorded interesting stories. He gained a lot of interesting stories, but his knowledge was still half-baked. He no longer disturbed a chi's reading. He called Lolth and headed straight for the sea. According to the direction a chi had indicated, he was ready to go to the rocky island, find the group of golden lip clams and study them carefully. Since he had the 7-colored whale Lolth as a mount, List rode it into the sea almost every day to enjoy the magnificent scenery of the sea. For many people, the sea was an unknown forbidden area, always accompanied by all kinds of mysterious legends, unknown sea monsters and the dark abyss. Ordinary people did not dare to set foot in the sea easily. When he was searching for the giant algae forest, if it weren't for a chi's company, List would not have dared to go into the sea casually. But as the number of times he went into the sea increased, he had overcome his deep-sea phobia and fell in love with the feeling of galloping in the sea. The ecosystem that was completely different from that on land, the colorful fish, corals, aquatic plants and seabed creatures as well as sharks, turtles and so on, deeply attracted him. Even though the 7-colored whale was only a low-level dragon and had only one kind of magic, colorful breathing membrane, it was still a tyrant in the sea and not many could threaten it. There was no danger in the waters around Coral Island and Black Horse Island. Even if it encountered a group of huge sharks once, the 7-colored whale still bravely rushed up, knocked over one of them, easily tore open its abdomen and ate its liver. Then it scared away all the rest of the sharks. Even a humpback whale tens of meters long, when it saw the 7-colored whale, turned around and swam away, not daring to approach. Chapter 554. This chapter is for the leader Glorious Warsong, 1 chapter for now and 13 chapters later. There are 4 islands around Black Horse Island. Mangrove Island, Sandbeach Island, Rocky Island, and Seagull Island. Mangrove Island is Nami's hometown, where many caterpillars and mallards are raised. Sandbeach Island has many fragrant coconut trees and fragrant coconut tree cordyceps are also transplanted here. Seagull Island also has a mangrove forest, but it has not yet been developed. Rocky Island, on the other hand, has always been neglected. Because the island is full of basalt pillars, and it has been mined once, it was found that there was no volcanic glass buried under the island, so it was completely abandoned. Standing on the basalt pillar of the island, List carefully identified the surrounding position, then found the direction pointed by a chi, rode the colorful whale Lolth again and swam toward the sea. Diving to the bottom of the sea, he could see that the island was full of rocks and there was not much silt. Many corals attached to the rocks, forming coral reefs. All kinds of fish and shrimp live in the coral reefs. List cast magic eyes and followed Lolth as she swam, constantly searching the bottom of the sea, hoping to find the golden-lipped clam and see if there could be a little surprise. Unfortunately, the sea looked infinite, but there were not many objects with magic light. Even the number of sea monsters was far less than in World of Warcraft on land. So after swimming for a long time, he did not find any magic light. When he found the light of magic retroaction, he also entered the living area of the golden-lipped clams, not far from Rocky Island. However, the reef area was far from the bottom of the sea and belonged to the silt area. The depth of the water was about 100 meters or so, and the water pressure was already very high, making breathing difficult. However, List's physique was strong after all. He and the colorful whale had experimented together. Without protection they could dive 400 meters to the limit. As for the colorful whale Lolth, according to a chi, Lolth could dive to a depth of 1,500 meters, which was also a cheese diving limit. Usually, Lolth swam within 200 meters of the sea. It's really a large area of golden-lipped clams. Unfortunately, I don't have much fighting power underwater. Otherwise, I really want to open a few more golden-lipped clams and take out a batch of golden pearls for research. List gestured for Rose to swim around the periphery and not to invade the territory of the golden-lipped clam. Let Achi catch the golden pearl later. After observing for a while, he found that the largest golden-lipped clam was basically the same size as the one Achi brought back, which was the size of a wash basin. There were more than a few hundred of them, and the area they were distributed over was not considered large. There was no value in continuing to observe. He touched Rose's belly and motioned for her to leave. Instead of returning to Flower Town, he swam to Black Horse Island. After he reached the shore, he gestured for Rose to wait for a while. Very quickly, he switched to another horse and galloped towards the Mage Tower. He handed the golden pearl to Chris and asked her to study its properties. Only then did he return to Flower Town. However, when he arrived at the seaside of the town, he suddenly saw a few white things floating on the sea. From afar they looked like human skulls. His gaze focused and he quickly steered Rose towards the white floating object. When he got closer, he realized that it wasn't a human skull, but some sort of white, fruit-like object. Fruit? Could it be the floating fruit mentioned in the smoke mission? He quickly picked up one of the fruits and found that it was indeed the size of a human head. It was indeed a kind of fruit, which made him suddenly think of a slightly familiar fruit. It seems like the skull fruit that old Leathersmith mentioned before? Summoning the smoke mission. The mission was impressively completed. Mission completed. Reward, floating skull fruit. As expected, these are the human skull fruits, the fruits of the human skull tree. Old Leathersmith said that when he was a child on the Dodo Island, the local natives ate skull fruits to satisfy their hunger. List had a very good memory and he still had an impression of the conversation from 2 years ago. At this time, the smoke serpentines in front of him had changed. Mission. Does the discovery of the skull fruit remind you of your past memories? The island that was destroyed by the volcanic eruption. Old Leathersmith can no longer remember the location of the Dodo Island, but it should not be far from here. Why not find it? Reward, Dodo Island's volcano. Oh. Dodo Island's volcano? List suddenly recalled that old Leathersmith Phil once said that the volcanic eruption of the Dodo Island had destroyed a large number of skull trees, leaving the natives without a source of food. Thereupon, the natives chopped down the trees to make canoes and wandered about. At that time, the one who was on the same canoe as old Leathersmith was the author of the Diary of a Descendant of Philip Taiyang. Unfortunately, Philip Taiyang accidentally fell into the water while catching fish and died, leaving behind only a single diary, which was kept by old Leathersmith as a souvenir. In the end, it fell into List's hands. I didn't expect that the volcano on the Dodo Island had erupted a few decades ago. Who knows, it might still erupt. Charmander had always lacked a volcanic environment to grow. List had inquired about many islands in the Grand Duchy of Sapphire, but none of the active volcanoes on the islands would erupt at any time. The few active volcanoes that had eruptions in the past were all on distant large islands that List couldn't go to. I didn't expect the smoke mission to directly reward the volcano on the Dodo Island. Does this mean that this volcano is an active volcano and it is likely to find magma from the crater? Active volcanoes do not mean magma. Basically, most volcanoes can only see magma when they erupt. Usually, the magma and high temperature are hidden tens or hundreds of kilometers deep underground. It is not known if magma can be seen in the volcano on the Dodo Island, but at least it is an opportunity. Not for anything else, just the island itself was valuable. For many lords, a deserted island is a burden and has no value, but for List, every inch of land can be used. I have to get ready and find the time to look for the Dodo Island. 2 magicians were waiting in the castle. Their names were Garcia Truth and Randolph Truth. They were ordinary magicians, not young and had limited potential. Otherwise, they would not have chosen teaching as a profession. Of course, the great magician Chris Truth was also one of the factors in their application. After all, it is not common to get the opportunity to communicate with the great magician. Since you have accepted the application, you have also accepted the management regulations of Black Horse Island. As long as you do not violate the regulations, you are free in the territory. At the same time, there will be someone responsible for arranging your daily life, so don't worry about trivial things. I wish you a happy life on Black Horse Island. Thank you, Sir Viscount. Please rest assured that we are all magicians with good records and will not violate the territory ban. After a simple reception, the two set off by boat for Black Horse Island. Then List asked the servant to find the old leathersmith Phil. Phil's leathersmith shop did not move to Port Town. He had lived in Flower Town for half his life and was unwilling to move away. Although he did not accept the manservant Jesse as his son, he married a middle-aged widow and his life was getting better. However, his wife was not pregnant, and the blood of the son's child had to be taken from old Phil. Old Phil, how much do you remember about the Dodo Island? Sir Lord, I was very young when I left the Dodo Island. I could not tell the direction at all while drifting in a canoe. However, I have heard Philip mention that 800 kilometers south of the Dodo Island is the island where he works, Hot Spring Island. I also drifted south and eventually drifted to the Hot Spring Island. The old leathersmith replied. Hot Spring Island is on the west side of Coral Island, about a day's sail away, and is the territory of an earl. Therefore, the location of the Dodo Island is roughly north of Hot Spring Island and Coral Island, but it is impossible to determine where it is. He only knows that it is 800 kilometers away. It would take about 2.5 days to travel 800 kilometers by boat, and 10 hours to ride the colorful whale Lolth. List silently calculated, it's not too far. I can ride Lolth and take a chi to the sea area 800 miles north of the Hot Spring Island and search carefully. A chi has taught herself a lot of sailing knowledge. She can tell the direction so she should not get lost. Thinking of this, he sent the old leathersmith away and went straight to the seaside villa to find a chi. A chi, I got news that there is a Dodo Island 800 kilometers north of the Hot Spring Island. I want to go with you to find it. Can you tell the direction at sea? A chi put down the triangle theory and magic array structure unified demonstration and nodded. Well, a chi has learned the navigation guide and can tell the direction by the stars. Moreover, a chi herself remembers the way in the sea. She will not get lost in the sea. Chapter 555. The day before he set out to find the Dodo Island, another happy event came. List's grandmother had given him a green ingot potted plant on his birthday. The sprite worm was finally born. After the contract, it became List's 38th sprite worm. So far, including the sprites contracted by a chi, he had a total of 1 greater sprite, 6 lesser sprites and 43 sprite worms. He was no longer as shabby as when he first came to Flower Town. He was not much worse than some count families with weak foundations. He recalled meeting the widow of the Count of Cape Island at Meople's birthday party, Madame Martha Yipon. When the other party mentioned that he could get a lesser sprite by staying in her daisy castle for a while, he almost wavered. I suffered for a lesser sprite, but now that I have so many sprites, why do I still feel like I am suffering? He thought that he could see the invitation from the daisy castle, but he found that he was still brooding over the lesser sprite. What could be more cost-effective in the world than to get a lesser sprite by staying for a while? Madame Martha's appearance inadvertently emerged in his mind. She was a lady in her 30s with a dignified bearing and noble temperament, and there was an unconcealable flirtatiousness between her eyebrows. It could be imagined that in her prime she must have been a beauty with a score of 8 or above. Unfortunately, after Meople's birthday party, he never saw Madame Martha again. They also did not exchange communication methods. There was no daily correspondence with Madame Martha, but List maintained daily correspondence with the Taro family. Coral Island and Red Crab Island maintained frequent trade relations. Flower wine, glass and flower soap have all been a whirlwind in Red Crab Island and are well received. At the moment, in the master bedroom of the Long Taro Castle, Marquis Merlin had another relapse and was lying in bed. He was still busy writing at the small table on the bed, summarizing his life's achievements. At this moment, Meople knocked on the door and came in with a smile on his face. Grandfather, List's letter has arrived. You certainly can't guess what happened. I still can't believe it after reading the letter. Marquis Merlin raised his head, his face full of wrinkles, the fire of life like a candle flickering in the wind. Did he promote to a sacred swordsman so quickly? No, it's about the elves. He obtained another lesser sprite? When talking to Marquis Merlin, Meople didn't dare to casually show off and directly said in a surprised tone, "It's a great elf. A giant kelp sprite can grow a large amount of magic herbs, and it's also a great sprite in the sea." Marquis Merlin stared blankly for a moment before regaining his composure. Encountering a wild great spirit in the sea is indeed praiseworthy, but how will one overcome the obstacles in planting a potion in the sea? The letter didn't mention this, But List did write that he had already planned for 10,000 acres of sea area by the sea to be planted with magic medicine giant algae. In that case he must have a way to grow potions in the sea. I remember that he has always been interested in the sea and would send me a lot of oyster sauce every time. Oyster sauce is indeed an exquisite seasoning. The seafood he mentioned has a special taste if you occasionally enjoy it. Marquis Merlin nodded. All of Melissa's beauty and intelligence were inherited by List. Lee William is really a lucky guy. In the past, List wasn't valued by the Tulip family. I thought that it was because his aptitude wasn't good, so I wanted to take care of him. I didn't expect him to just not reveal his talent. In the 2 years after the enfeoffment, his development was too rapid, and he has already become a Sky Knight. There was a lot of envy in Meople's eyes, but the admiration was also sincere. He sent me the List's Mother Earth manuscript, which gave me a lot of inspiration for my cultivation. I feel that I also have signs of a breakthrough recently. Perhaps in another year or so, I'll be able to promote to a Sky Knight. I look forward to the arrival of that day. Sooner or later, the Taro family will be handed over to you. I understand. Marquis Merlin motioned for a servant to place a pillow behind his head, and then said, "That handbook is well written. Among all the heirs of the Long Taro clan, he has the deepest understanding of cultivation, and can think of many new cultivation methods. His performance is far more outstanding than when he came to visit me 2 years ago." I don't know what List's future upper limit is. Grandfather, do you think that Uncle Lee William can become the Grand Duchy's 7th Marquis? The area of Ironhoof Island can be divided into 3 marquises. The Grand Duke also intends to expand the Blue Blood Alliance and squeeze out 2 more marquises. If nothing unexpected happens, Lee William will be able to snatch one of the 5 marquises. Moreover, it might be the Marquis of Ironhoof Island. He shouldn't be interested in the Blue Blood Alliance. The Blue Blood Alliance only had 1 city, and all of its resources depended on the Sapphire family. It was far less attractive than the title of Marquis. After all, who would be willing to be a henchman or a hired thug if they could become a local tyrant? Marquis Merlin paused and then continued, "As for List, he is the rising star of the aristocracy in the country. He has a great future ahead of him. Perhaps the Grand Duke will start paying attention to him. Yes, he is, after all, the youngest Sky Knight in the country. I have seen countless people. List's quality is good and he can be relied on. But the most important thing is to rely on oneself. This country is in troubled times. Grandfather, it's not as bad as you think, right?" When Angela went back to visit her relatives, the Grand Duke and the Sapphire Dragon were fine. Marquis Merlin narrowed his eyes, which flickered. It was unknown what he was thinking, but his eyes eventually became turbid. "Has there been any movement in Angela's stomach?" Meople was embarrassed and anxious. "We have been working hard." Then he hurriedly found an excuse to leave Marquis Merlin's bedroom. Looking at his fleeing grandson, Marquis Merlin sighed with a complicated expression. He then buried his head in his desk and wrote at a great speed, sorting out his life. The old butler brought a cup of green tea. "Master, this is the new tea sent by young Master List. After brewing, the color and fragrance are much better than before. You should take a rest after drinking the tea. You have been writing for 2 hours straight, you can't continue to work hard." "I don't have much time. Master, you will certainly live to a ripe old age. No need to comfort me. You and I have known each other for more than 50 years. Although there is a difference between master and servant at this age, there is no need to pay attention to the superficial etiquette of aristocracy." Marquis Merlin smiled in a carefree manner and then sighed, "My life has been wonderful. I thought I could go to my heart's content, but in the end I still have many worries." "Master, are you worried about young Master and young Master Merlin? The Taro family has few heirs. I only have 1 son, Mesiro, and Mesiro only gave birth to Meople. Angela has not moved for more than half a year. Young Master Merlin and Madame Merlin are still working hard. Master, you should have confidence in them. Forget it, let's not talk about this. Is there any news about that old thing Wallace?" "Deep Throat Island is very calm. I heard that Marquis Wallace is very healthy and can eat 3 kilograms of World of Warcraft meat in 1 meal." The more Marquis Merlin thought about it, the angrier he got. That old guy is the same age as me, yet he is still alive and kicking. He can chase after youngsters on the battlefield and beat them up, too shameless. More importantly, the Marquis of Deep Throat Island, Wallace Pineapple Green, had many descendants. His 3 sons were already married and had children, while his eldest son had grandchildren. Chapter 556. The troubles and worries of Red Crab Island did not affect List, who went out to sea to search for Dodo Island. He carefully organized the 4 space gems and prepared all the survival necessities from World of Warcraft, milk, potions, weapons, and even brewed tea. He patrolled Black Horse Island, Flower Town, and the surrounding waters, and held 2 meetings to arrange territorial construction tasks. After he was ready, he informed Achi, rode on the Rainbow Whale Lolth, and headed north to search. To the north and west of the Aquamarine Sea was the Devil's Sea. Legend had it that the Devil's Sea was where the Devil's Sea came and went. Even the Dragon Knight could not cross the Devil's Sea. The Grand Duchy of Sapphire had been established in this archipelago for 153 years, but apart from opening the Azure Wave Sea route, almost no one had opened a route in the direction of the Devil's Sea. Therefore, Coral Island and Hot Spring Island were basically the northernmost areas explored by humans. Dodo Island belonged to the kind of island that people wouldn't think much of even if they knew about it. Therefore, there wouldn't be any nautical charts pointing to this island. Achi could only lead List to explore the vast sea with her knowledge of sailing and her own closeness to the sea. The distance of 800 kilometers, including the delay of eating and resting, basically took 12 hours before they arrived at the designated area. Big Brother, according to the map we drew earlier, we need to use this place as a starting point and continue to search this sea area. I noticed a problem earlier. What problem? List said, this sea area is very deep. According to the general formation of islands, they are either located on the continental shelf, or formed by volcanic eruptions, or formed by the continuous deposition of coral reefs. The archipelago of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire basically belonged to the continental shelf islands. On Earth, islands like the Grand Duchy of Sapphire could be called continents, especially the Blue Dragon Island, which was almost the size of Australia, and the Ironhoof Island was half the size of Australia. The waters of the Aquamarine Wave Sea were very shallow, with an average depth of only a few hundred meters. There was no depth exceeding 1,000 meters. Several hundred kilometers west of the Coral Island, there is a depth of more than 1,500 meters. List thinks that Coral Island and Black Horse Island may be on the edge of the continental shelf. Beyond that was the continental slope. The continental slope sloped downwards and reached the bottom of the ocean. That was the true underwater world. Of course, List was not a geographer or oceanographer. He only knew a little about continental shelves and continental slopes. There is no way to explore the deep sea himself. After all, he can only dive a few hundred meters deep. Even the Siren Achi can only dive 1,500 meters. 1,500 meters was not enough to reach the bottom of the sea. Basically, the Aquamarine Wave Sea was the continental shelf sea, and the Devil's Sea was the real deep sea. No one knew what creatures lived there. Messy thoughts flashed past his mind. He continued, the Dodo Island should be a typical volcanic island. To find it, you can actually see it from the topography of the seabed. When a volcano erupts from the seabed, it will form a gentle slope. If you find this topography, you can conveniently find the Dodo Island. As he spoke, he took out thick bast paper, ink, and a quill, and drew a diagram on Rose's back. After Achi looked carefully, it was easy to understand what List meant. Well, brother, Achi understands. Next, Achi will carefully search the seabed. Brother will wait for Achi on the surface. List could not dive to the bottom of the sea. Achi was the main search force. But despite the method, finding the Dodo Island did not become easy. Although Achi dived to a depth of more than 800 meters, she could not judge the topography of the seabed. It rose and fell and it was very uneven. Take your time. I'm ready to spend a week in this area. List, who was sleeping on the sampan, comforted the anxious Achi. The sampan was naturally stored in the gem space. As long as his chi could wrap around the sampan, he could stuff it into the gem space. He was not a fish. He could not sleep in the sea, so he had to take a boat and sleep on it. With the wind and water pearls, the wind and waves on the sea could not affect him. Achi's big shell floated on the side of the sampan. She looked enviously at Rose, who was wandering in the distance. It would be good if Achi could sleep like Rose. Rose was a dolphin. When she slept, she would open one eye and close the other, but her body was still swimming. Because her left and right brain would take turns to sleep, ensuring that she would never drown because she fell asleep. I don't envy Rose. Of course, when you sleep, you have to sleep. Not thinking about anything is the best enjoyment. List looked up at the stars in the sky and asked casually, Achi, do you know what the stars in the sky are? Stars. Achi shook her head. I don't know. Are they glowing stones? Every star is a sun, Yizichin said. Sun? Yes, most of the glowing stars are stars similar to the sun. Only a few are probably planets revolving around the sun. The world we are in is a planet. Of course, this is all my guess. List did not dare to say anything definite. He could not guarantee that this world was really a planet world. What if the sky was round and the earth was square? What if a big turtle carried the whole world on its back? Of course, this did not prevent him from showing off the ordinary astronomical knowledge on Earth to the little siren girl. In particular, the theory of the Big Bang scared the little sea monster so much that she was stunned. But after a while, she seemed to be thoughtful, and even the conversation was not so engrossed. Seeing this, List was no longer in the mood to brag about his Big Bang theory that was mixed between true and false. He simply muttered in his heart, "A cheese state seems to have inspired her magic cultivation after hearing me talk about the Big Bang theory? If that's the case, then her talent is really incredible." Thinking of this, he decisively quieted down and admired the stars in the sky alone. In the bright starry sky, a bright Milky Way hung in the sky. He didn't know whether it was the Milky Way or some other galaxy. His thoughts drifted and his mind wandered. At this moment, suddenly the sound of huge waves crashing came from afar, pulling him back to reality. He suddenly turned his head and looked into the distance. The night was too dark to see clearly. It seemed that some fish were making waves in the distance. It was definitely a big fish that could make such a loud sound. He immediately cast magic eyes to see if it was a sea monster. The next moment, a bright blue and white light appeared in his eyes. It was a huge whale made of magic. The magic on its body was far richer than all the World of Warcraft and sea monsters he had seen. It was rolling on the surface of the sea, leisurely slapping the water and swimming in his direction. Chapter 557. This chapter is Wang Daorong reward added. A Qi, who was deep in thought, also noticed the commotion in the distance. Even the rainbow whale, Lolth, swam over quickly and picked up List, who had put away the sampan, while making urgent chirping sounds. She was warning them of danger. "Brother, a Qi feels a lot of pressure. It's a sea monster whale. It's huge and full of magic power. I suspect it's a high-level sea monster." List quickly said, "A Qi, be careful and follow me. We'll avoid this whale. It's so huge it probably won't be interested in us." Yes, big whales are very gentle sea beasts. A Qi heaved a sigh of relief and followed behind List. They swam to the side and avoided the path of this huge monster. The whale monster was really huge. Wherever it passed, it would constantly slap the seawater, splashing huge waves. It was also accompanied by a strange cry. This cry was ethereal, silent, sharp, and cold. It gave people a strange feeling as if they were in the deep sea. Boom. Splat. The whale monster suddenly rushed out of the water and then slammed heavily on the surface of the sea, creating even bigger waves than before. It rolled and swam as if it did not have a clear goal. It did not care about List and a Qi who were not far away. It was just playing its game alone. "Brother, what is this big whale doing?" With the weak starlight, a Qi could barely see the whale monster's movements. After all, it was making too much noise. List narrowed his eyes and said thoughtfully, "Maybe it's looking for a mate." It was a prophecy. Half an hour later, the two suddenly discovered that other than the whale monster that kept rolling on the surface of the sea, there was another whale monster that was slightly smaller but also full of magic power swimming over from afar. It kept swimming in circles around the rolling whale monster as if sizing it up. Seeing this new whale-like sea monster, the whale rolled even harder. It kept roaring as if to show off its strength. Its body was at least 50 meters long. Every time it rolled over, huge waves would roar. Moreover, it could also release magic, which was a very spectacular magic. The seawater around the whale monster was suddenly pushed away by some powerful magic power, forming a huge ring-shaped vacuum environment. But soon, the vacuum environment was filled with powerful pressure, and an explosion occurred. There was no smoke or dust from the explosion, but the huge force threw thousands of tons of seawater into the air. If there were any fish around, they would have been directly squeezed into powder by this powerful explosion. List clearly felt the surging power in his magic eyes. Even he himself would be torn to shreds if he were to fall into the range of this spell. I suspect that these two whale sea monsters might not be high-level sea monsters, but should be classified as super sea monsters. The magic it cast is unprecedented, but its power is astonishing. There was no clear boundary between super and advanced. In fact, the boundaries between low-level, intermediate, and high-level World of Warcraft were basically blurred, except for the number of spells. It was not impossible for the powerful low-level World of Warcraft to kill the weak ones in the intermediate World of Warcraft. Just like the current Chocobo Loki, an intermediate dragon beast, but apart from its ability to escape, its combat power might not be able to defeat a flying dust dog. Even some ferocious beasts could kill World of Warcraft. List saw with his own eyes that a hound raised in Tulip Castle single-handedly fought a low-level World of Warcraft fire rabbit. It only took it 10 seconds to kill a fire rabbit that was about to release a fireball. Speaking of which, the fire rabbit, which was raised to eat meat in World of Warcraft, was basically the shame of World of Warcraft. In short, the classification of World of Warcraft was chaotic. They did not have a clear change in nature like the Knight's warrior energy. There were only differences in physical quality, mana dissipation, and number of spells. It was not wrong to say that these two behemoths were super sea monsters. After all, with their size, just the water pressure caused by their tumbling bodies could kill some low-level sea monsters. Just like how the whale monster slapped the water on the surface of the sea with its huge pectoral fin. If List rode the rainbow whale Lolth closer, he would probably be smashed into meat paste. Of course, when the battle really started, List would not be so stupid as to run over and smack the whale monster flat. The sea was the sea monster's home field, the sky was the Sky Knight's battlefield. At this time, he and the whale minded their own business. In fact, there was a free live broadcast of a giant beast's courtship for him to observe and learn. It was quite interesting. After releasing the powerful magic that List called Vacuum Water Explosion, the whale monster finally set its eyes on the rolling whale monster. It slowly approached. Then the two whales and sea monsters stood side by side and danced with each other, making sounds that sounded like they were singing together. Then the larger whale monster slowly placed its pectoral fins on the smaller whale monster's body, rubbing against each other to find the right position. It pushed hard. It began to move like a piston. "Oh, it hurts my eyes." List clicked his tongue and commented. This set of movements could only be observed with the vision of the magic eye, and the outline of the organ formed by magic light could clearly see the bright light of the mating position. Like the magic essence of the two whale monsters blended with each other, the magic power ran and mixed at a high speed. However, the painful process lasted only 30 seconds and ended in a hurry. The female whale monster seemed to be very satisfied. She happily made strange sounds and swam away side by side with the male whale monster. Until they disappeared. The sea was calm again. Achi looked at the dark sea and asked, "Brother, is the big whale gone?" "Gone. Ah, it's a pity that it's night. Achi can't even see what the big whale looks like." List took out the sampan again, lay down in it and smiled. "There's nothing to look at. It looks like an ordinary whale, just bigger." In sailor's legend, seeing a whale meant good luck. It seemed to be just a beautiful wish of the sailors, but good luck really came the next day. Achi found a gentle slope like a mountain range at the bottom of the sea. They immediately swam up the gentle slope. Finally, they saw an island with faint smoke rising from it. Dodo Island. List's spirit was lifted. He expected to spend a week to find the Dodo Island, but he didn't expect good luck to come one after another after watching a whale action movie for free. On the second day after arriving at this sea area, they found the target they were looking for, the Dodo Island. Looking at the volcanic island, the shore was surrounded by lush forests, and the top of the mountain was a smoky crater. He already knew that the volcano he was looking for was here. It was probably the kind of active volcano that was erupting. Roar. 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 Feeling the breath of the volcano, the little fire dragon Leo, who was sleeping on his chest, woke up from his deep sleep and roared anxiously. List could feel his extreme desire for the volcano. Chapter 558. This chapter is Soy Milk is Not Milk. Thank you for updating. The Dodo Island was just a small island, probably not even 1/10 of Black Horse Island. The descendants of the sun who lived on the Dodo Island were less than 300 people. The entire volcano occupied 80% of the Dodo Island's area. At this time the sun had not yet set. From where List landed, he could see the sun hanging on the edge of the crater. The faint smoke lingered around the sun, and in the process of reflecting the sunlight, there seemed to be a looming rainbow hanging. This scene was too beautiful to be absorbed in. "Achi, you and Rose wait for me here. I will go to the island and search it first." Okay. Without a mount, List had to walk. He first looked at the woods on the shore. Just as he had guessed, these tall trees were human skull trees. There were ripened and unripened fruits that looked like human skulls. These were all edible human skull fruits. He had tasted the ones that were floating on the sea. After opening the shell, there was soft white meat inside. It tasted sweet, tough, and had a faint orange aroma. If he had to compare it, it was a bit similar to the jackfruit that List had eaten on Earth, but the taste and color were different. It couldn't be said to be delicious, but it was not bad either. However, the skull fruit was indeed very appetizing and could be eaten as a meal. List just glanced at the woods and did not stay for long. He climbed directly to the volcano. At a height of more than 50 meters on the hillside, there were basically no skull trees that could grow. Only some shrubs and weeds grew. Further up, even the shrubs and weeds were gone. Only the dark mountain was left. Stepping on it, List clearly saw that the mountain was covered with cracks and pores. It was simply cooled magma. He didn't know how long it had cooled down, but it should not be magma that erupted recently. Brr. The little fire dragon in his chest couldn't hold back anymore and was eager to come out. List did not let it out. He needed to determine the environment of the volcano before deciding whether the little fire dragon should practice here. Jumping. He climbed toward the crater. As he got closer and closer to the crater, he could clearly feel the rise in temperature. As they neared the top of the mountain, the temperature had already reached the level of a sauna. Enduring the scorching heat, List jumped directly to the crater and looked inside the crater. The crater was about the size of a football field. In the crater, which was 20 to 30 meters deep, there was a large piece of black rock. On the right side, there was a pool of water that was bubbling and releasing a large amount of water vapor. On the left, there was a rolling pool of crimson. That's lava. List was overjoyed. Sure enough, this active volcano was in the process of erupting. The lava was boiling and the smell of sulfur assaulted him. He couldn't stop little fire dragon Leo from rushing out of his chest. Leo turned into a mighty fire dragon that was more than 10 meters long, and it let out a resonant roar. It glanced at List, then dove straight into the crater of the volcano and plunged into the pool of dark red magma. The dark red magma in fact was not a real liquid. It was more appropriate to say that it was molten stone. It was slowly rolling like mud. Leo plunged in, and just when List thought that it would get stuck inside, it suddenly turned into a flame and merged into the magma. Huh. List looked at the calm magma and couldn't find Leo. After casting magic eyes, he suddenly found that the entire crater seemed to be shrouded in a faint red magic power. The red magic power at the location of the magma was the densest. Leo's magic power seemed to turn into a net, covering the magma. However, the net became thinner and soon disappeared. List didn't know what this meant. He waited for a moment. He waited for Leo's head to appear. Seeing that the sun was getting lower and lower and was about to fall below the sea level, he began to feel anxious. Leo would definitely not drown in the magma, but if Leo went in and never came out, it would be a big joke. He had to shout, "Leo! Leo! Leo!" There was no response. This ungrateful person. List cursed inwardly. He operated his dragon's chi, and his figure immediately soared into the air and fell on the black stone inside the crater. After landing, he felt that the air was scalding and the smell was pungent, as if he was being roasted. "Leo! Leo! Leo!" He once again shouted at the magma in front of him. While shouting, he endured the high temperature and walked towards the magma. The magma was probably hundreds of degrees, and even the temperature in the air was hundreds of degrees, with a lot of sulfur mixed in. When he was 10 meters away, he didn't dare to go any closer. He could only hold his breath, stop, and shout. 10 minutes later, there was no response. He had been cursing Leo in his heart. From raising the magic fire seed to rebirth to now, he had been raised for half a year. Who knows how much magic power of the infinite value of the fire dragon, how much magic potions and beef were consumed, and the price of Coral Island's beef had increased several times. In the end, without saying a word, he ran into the magma and never showed up again. He simply had no conscience. "Leo!" He unwillingly shouted a few more times, but there was still no response. At this time, the sun had completely set, and there was only a trace of light on the horizon. In the crater, one could only see by the red light of the magma. He looked at the magma that was still slowly rolling. List's expression was gloomy. For the first time, he felt that his training method for the little fire dragon Leo was somewhat deficient. If it was an adult dragon, perhaps accommodating and getting used to it was the way to get along. But for a young dragon, accommodating was a failure. Perhaps ruthlessly training was the most correct way. Only in this way could he correctly establish the 3 views of it as a mount. I miscalculated. He got up, flew up, jumped onto the crater's mountain wall and sat on it, trying to wait a little longer. After a while, a misty smoke slowly appeared before his eyes. Mission completed. Reward, Volcano of Fairy Island. The next moment, the smoke serpentines changed. Mission: Volcano of Fairy Island will become an important growth habitat for the little fire dragon. It will also become an important place for you as a dragon knight to practice cultivation. Take a good tour of the island, formulate a suitable cultivation plan, and grow together with the little fire dragon. Reward: a sprite worm. Grow together? That guy has already forgotten about me. List looked at the mission's contents with a cold expression. His mood was very bad, but he was not panicking. In any case, Leo was in the volcano. Sooner or later he would catch it again. When that time came, he would have to properly whip it and let it understand that some behavior cannot be presumptuous. From my observation just now, there seems to be no animals on this mountain. Even if there are, they are only some small animals. Although Leo is accompanied by a volcano, it still needs to eat. The sea is all around it, making it impossible for it to survive on its own. This is my chance. List stood up, suppressed all his negative emotions and regained his composure. Even if I stop its source of food, won't I still have to need it? He smiled grimly. He turned around and slowly left the crater. Chapter 559. Seaside. A crystal lamp illuminated the beach at night. List sat on a rock and deliberated to communicate with Achi. Achi, have you ever seen a dragon? Dragon? Achi really wants to see a dragon. I heard that dragons are the most beautiful animals in the world, but Achi has never seen a real dragon. Even the sea monsters have infinite yearning for dragons. Dragons are really beautiful. List finally decided to tell Achi the secret of the fire dragon. In fact, my brother has a dragon, a young fire dragon. It is called Leo. But this little fire dragon is very disobedient, even a little ungrateful. Looking at Achi's mouth wide open in surprise, he did not forget to add a few bad words about the little fire dragon. Brother actually has a fire dragon? Yes, it is a little fire dragon that I resurrected from the fire dragon bones on Black Horse Island. This is my biggest secret. The influence of a dragon is too great, so I have never mentioned it to anyone. Therefore, Achi, you are the first person to know this secret. Achi was surprised and happy and nodded solemnly. Well, Achi will definitely protect the secret of the fire dragon for my brother. List touched her blue hair and smiled. In fact, Achi, you are my most precious secret. Who would have thought that I would have a siren sister? Achi narrowed her eyes and felt comfortable like a kitten. List did not lie. In his mind, Achi was far more important than Leo. His most recognized family was Achi, not the Tulip family. Perhaps the physical bloodline could not be separated from the Tulip family, but the soul was incompatible with the Tulip family in this world. Only the siren Achi, who was as pure as a piece of white paper, was his warmest spiritual sustenance. I came to Dudu Island to find a volcano and give Leo a suitable environment to grow in, but Leo forgot about me when he got into the volcano. What about my brother? Don't lose Leo. It doesn't matter. Ever since Leo was born, his body needs food. There are no animals on Dodo Island that can satisfy his hunger. Sooner or later he will fly out of the volcano and apologize to me. As if she could imagine the posture of the little fire dragon apologizing to List, Achi said with a smile. Hee, listening to brother, Leo is also very cute. No, it's a willful young dragon that lacks training. Maybe it's because Leo is still too young and doesn't know anything. Big brother, you can be more patient with him. I believe that one day, Leo will recognize Big Brother and become Big Brother's most important partner. Just like the legendary Dragon Knight, he stands at the pinnacle of power in this world. I think so too. That's why we need to teach Leo well. List explained his plan. I need to constantly build up my territory to support this fire dragon, so I won't be staying on Dodo Island often. I might come here every few days to cultivate with Leo. When I'm not here, you have to take care of him. Okay. And if I participate in the development order, I will be gone for several months. I also need to ask you to take care of the little fire dragon. I can't really let him starve to death. Leo was still young. Following him to the battlefield would be a burden, and there was also the risk of being exposed. Achi can catch fish for him to eat. Okay, when I find him at the crater, I will bring him here and let you two get to know each other. But Leo's character is a bit bad. You have to be careful not to get hurt by him. Big brother, don't worry. Achi will protect herself. Achi showed an expectant expression. Her eyes were almost sparkling. Even sea monsters had no resistance to dragons. In this world, dragons were synonymous with everything good, even if there were evil dragons. The little fire dragon Leo belonged to the evil dragon sequence. Humans could not hesitate to kill evil dragons one after another to get the hero title of Dragon Slayer. They could also put countless good words on any dragon. After revealing Leo to a chi, List suddenly felt a lot more relaxed. He had too many secrets and had nowhere to vent them. The secrets of the smoke dragon and the invisible dragon were easy to keep. There was no burden and he could keep them for a long time. But the little fire dragon Leo couldn't keep them. He needed someone to share the burden with him. Originally, he was inclined to tell the Count about the little fire dragon's secret and let the Count help him raise the dragon. But with the discovery of the giant algae forest, it was not impossible for the territory to support the little fire dragon independently. So he extinguished the idea of letting the family help to raise the dragon to reduce the risk of exposure as much as possible. Now, revealing the secret to a chi was the most suitable choice. She could take care of the little fire dragon when List was busy. He couldn't expect the little fire dragon to take care of itself when it was only a few months old. List didn't know how other baby dragons were born and grew up. Maybe they were born strong enough to deal with crises. As long as they plunged into the forest, they could develop steadily. But Leo was different. He was a fire dragon born on an island in the sea. He couldn't be invisible like the invisible dragon. He couldn't hunt without being exposed, and he couldn't swim in the sea to catch fish. Hunger would expose him to human eyes at any time, and then he would be captured by a powerful knight. He would be forced to ride a dragon or be transformed into a dragon lord. He was lucky to meet List. He helped him recover, saved money, and raised him up. He didn't force him to ride or ride him, and he also tried his best to find a volcano. So, after talking about the dragon for half the night, they went to sleep. The next day, List got up before dawn. He took out toiletries from the gem space and carefully cleaned up. Then he had a hearty breakfast. He hurried up the mountain. He was familiar with the road, so he could fly directly. In a moment he came to the crater of the volcano. The pool was still boiling, the magma was still rolling, and the smell of sulfur was still strong and pungent. Leo! 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 Except for the echo of the crater, there was no response. He used the magic eyes, but he couldn't see Leo. Although he was mentally prepared, there was still no response after a night, which made him feel bad. After a while, he adjusted and went down the mountain to explore the skull forest. The island was not very big, and the skull forest was distributed in a ring on the island's shore. It was very easy to scan with the magic eyes. So in the afternoon he explored the entire Dodo Island and found the reward of the smoke mission, the skull tree sprite worm. On a much taller human skull tree, the human skull worm was happily basking in the sun. Suddenly, a lot of delicious jade powder fell from the sky. It ate it again and then it bit a finger. In an instant, it contracted and became List's 39th sprite worm. Mission completed. Reward, a skull tree sprite worm. The skull forest had no development potential on Dodo Island. List didn't intend to develop this island. It was just a training ground for himself and Leo. So this sprite worm grass was to be brought back to Black Horse Island for planting. He quickly paid attention to the new smoke mission. Chapter 560. Sure enough, my half-baked knowledge of astronomy has a lot of inspiration for a chi. Maybe my half-baked knowledge of physics, chemistry, biology, and geography can also inspire a chi. Mages have always been searching for the truth, and my knowledge is also considered the truth, right? This world was different from Earth. In addition to the laws of physics, there were also laws of magic. Therefore, the knowledge of Earth alone could not measure this world, but the laws and knowledge of physics were obviously a very meaningful reference. Now that Dodo Island had been explored, the little fire dragon Leo had not come out yet. Since he had nothing to do, he naturally prepared to have a good chat with a chi, explaining more knowledge of astronomy, geography, physics, and chemistry to inspire her to understand the truth. He found a beach. He picked up a branch. He drew a galaxy on the sand. These are stars, the ones seen in the sky at night. Stars emit light and heat. There are many planets that do not emit light orbiting stars. These planets may be very cold or very hot and uninhabitable, but there are also worlds like ours. Ichi kept nodding. She digested and absorbed List's knowledge. She even took the initiative to ask, "Brother, why can those planets orbit stars?" Planets orbit stars because of gravity. Any object will have gravity, and the bigger the object, the stronger the gravity. The gravity of the star can capture the planet and make it orbit it. So you see, the sun is always the sun, never far away, never close. Then why don't the planets crash into the star? If they are attracted to each other, they should be attracted to each other very quickly. About that, Liszt coughed. It seemed that he really did not know why. It seemed to be related to rotation speed and centrifugal force. We need to explore further. It seems to be related to the rotation of the planet. Just like when you spin a small ball tied to a rope, it will fly out and counteract gravity. Oh. Achi did not know if she understood, so she asked again, why can stars hang in the sky? Can't they fall? There is no concept of falling in the universe. Why? Why do you have so many whys? Liszt forcibly changed the topic. There is no why. The essence of the universe needs to be explored. Now let's talk about the relationship between stars and galaxies. According to the information I obtained, countless star systems will form a huge galaxy, which may revolve around a black hole in the center. As for what a black hole is, in the following 2 days, Liszt was either instilling what he knew into Achi, or going to the crater to search for Leo. Unfortunately, Leo did not respond. He could not jump into the lava to search, so he could only wait. It hasn't eaten for 3 days. It should be hungry soon. Even if the volcano contains the ultimate fire attribute magic, it can't be eaten by it. However, on the 4th morning after little fire dragon Leo arrived on the island, Achi, who had been thinking hard on the beach, suddenly took action. She stood on top of the shell and slowly raised her hands. Then there was a soft chirp like that of a nightingale. Light flashed in her hands, and there was a huge explosion in the distant sea. Rumble. The explosion was so big that it was almost as powerful as the vacuum water explosion created by the giant whale monster a few days ago. It took a long time for the waves to calm down. Such a movement naturally attracted Liszt's attention. He hurriedly came over and asked, Achi, did you create a new spell? Achi replied excitedly, yes, brother. Achi heard from you that stars and planets revolve around each other, and the principle of nuclear fusion is that 2 atomic nuclei merge into one. So, Achi condensed a dynamic rotating magic circle, forced the fusion, and finally caused an explosion. Wow, my Achi is awesome. Liszt exclaimed with envy. This little siren's talent was simply amazing. With just a little bit of knowledge, she was able to create such a powerful spell. He asked again, is your spell an advanced spell or a more advanced one? It is just a form of dynamic magic circle, so it should still be an advanced spell. It has not broken through the nature and principle of dynamic magic circles. Give it a name. Brother, help me. It seemed that Achi was very satisfied with Liszt's ability to give names. He thought for a moment and said, just call it water fusion. The name directly included the 2 principles that made up the magic, which was indeed very appropriate. Brother, Achi will write down the casting plan of the advanced spell water fusion, and you can give it to Miss Chris for her reference. Achi knew about Chris, but Chris did not know about Achi's existence. As a matter of fact, Chris was Achi's teacher. She answered many of Achi's questions. She will be very happy to see the new magic casting plan. In fact, after you told Achi so much new knowledge, Achi still has a lot of inspiration to verify them and create a new spell. Then don't be in a hurry to write the casting plan. Grasp the inspiration first. Chris has many other advanced spells to learn, so she is not in a hurry to learn water fusion right now. Okay. Achi nodded and continued with her magic experiment. Liszt once again flew to the crater to find the little fire dragon Leo. At the same time he summoned the smoke mission. Mission completed. Reward, Achi's new spell water fusion. Immediately, a new mission was issued. The stubbornness of the little fire dragon has made you angry, so you have changed your attitude towards it. Now that you understand the nature of the little fire dragon, why not squeeze it dry once, let it fundamentally realize its mistakes and then correct them. Reward, a large piece of hemp rope vine. Ha! Seeing this mission, Liszt thoroughly understood that the smoke mission was a projection of his own spiritual power. At least in the formation of the mission, personal will occupied the active factor. It was a bit similar to the relationship of, what you think during the day you dream at night. Squeezing the little fire dragon dry and letting it understand how to be a dragon was a problem that Liszt had been thinking about these days. Now that it was reflected in the smoke mission, it could be said to be satisfactory. The reward of this mission is a large piece of hemp rope vine. What kind of plant is this? There were too many types of plants and Liszt's knowledge was limited. He had never heard of hemp rope vine. Listening to the name, it should be a vine plant, a rattan that grows like hemp rope. He didn't know what it was used for, and he didn't know if it appeared on Dodo Island, Black Horse Island, or simply in Flower Town. He didn't pay much attention to this hemp rope vine. He was thinking about how to squeeze the little fire dragon dry. At this time, the light of the setting sun barely hung down the last ray of light on the crater. The slowly rolling magma rumbled and exploded. Then, a ball of flames rushed out from within, quickly outlining the shape of a dragon, accompanied by a loud roar. Chapter 561. This chapter is titled, Forget About Giving a Name. Thank you very much. Roar. Leo landed in front of List and shouted at him directly. This action and tone meant that he was hungry and wanted List to feed him beef. You want to eat beef? List's face was expressionless, but his actions were firm. Leo, I know you are very smart and can already understand my words. Now I will give you two choices. The first choice is to continue to resist my orders and be free and slack off. Then you will starve to death. The second choice is to obey my orders and let me ride you. We will fight side by side and you will have enough meat and medicine. Leo took a step back and grinned. He rejected both choices. If that's the case, then you can go hungry. List didn't waste time and turned to leave. Of course, he still had to be wary of Leo's rebellion. However, with his current strength, the young Charmander wasn't his opponent. Charmander's fighting skills were too lacking. It saw List coming down the mountain. Charmander was stunned. Then it snorted like a horse in disdain. Then it flapped its wings and flew to the foot of the mountain. It wanted to hunt by itself. However, after circling around the forest at the foot of the mountain and burning a small area of human skull trees, it didn't even see a prey the size of a rabbit. It barely saw a few birds without wings. They sounded like dodos. However, the dodos went into a hole a few hundred meters away and couldn't be found. It roared unwillingly, but it was of no use. Until the sky turned dark, it still didn't find any prey. It wanted to fly out of the Dodo Island, but looking at the churning waves, it was afraid to go down. It had drowned a few times, so it had a deep memory. Without List by its side to protect it, it didn't have the guts to fly on the sea. It really couldn't find anything to eat. It flew into the sky and saw a bonfire in the distance. List was barbecuing some kind of World of Warcraft meat. The aroma spread and could be smelled even a kilometer away. However, Charmander turned around and rushed to the crater. It would rather starve to death than eat food given out in handouts. However, when he reached the crater and stepped on the scorching magma, he was just about to transform into a ball of magic power. But no matter what, he did not move. Its hungry stomach was eroding its will bit by bit. For the first time, it felt the cruelty of the outside world. List had barbecued it on purpose. The food in his gem space was prepared in advance and could be eaten directly. However, he still sprinkled some seasoning on the meat and barbecued it over the fire, spreading the aroma of the World of Warcraft meat to attract little Leo. I wonder how Leo is doing now. However, he was not in a hurry. In fact, when he saw Leo asking for food, he knew that everything was settled. Not far away by the sea, a Chi rested her chin on her hand and pondered. She was still immersed in magic, trying to connect the knowledge that List had told her with magic. Not to disturb her. List nibbled on the oily World of Warcraft meat while taking the giant algae potion, and next to him was a cup of fragrant bampo milk. Even in the wild, he still ate the castle's standard every meal. He was never willing to let himself suffer. Roar. Not far away there was the cry of the little fire dragon. He cast magic eyes and glanced in the direction of the sound. He vaguely saw that halfway up the mountain, the little fire dragon was squatting there and seemed to be looking at him. However, until he finished eating the World of Warcraft meat, the little fire dragon did not go down the mountain. On the contrary, after List closed the stall, it rushed to the crater of the Dodo Island with a roar and disappeared. You're quite patient. Well, let's see how many days you can endure. List unhurriedly cleaned up the tableware, said goodbye to a Chi, walked to his simple house made of the skull tree and canvas and began to sleep. He slept very comfortably that night. Early the next morning, List went to the crater again, took out a luxurious breakfast on the edge of the crater, and ate heartily. However, he did not see any trace of the little fire dragon. After eating, he went down the mountain to look for the smoke mission reward of a large area of hemp rope rattan to see if it was on the Dodo Island. Hemp rope rattan was probably an ordinary plant, so it was a bit difficult to find it with the naked eye. After looking for it all morning, he did not find it. At noon, he once again tempted the little fire dragon at the crater. In the afternoon, instead of continuing to look for hemp rope rattan, he rode the seven-colored whale Lolth around the shallow sea around the Dodo Island, looking for sprite worms in the sea. When he returned to the shore in the evening, he saw the little fire dragon hovering in the sky. Achi also saw the little fire dragon, which was the first time she saw a real dragon. "Brother, is that Leo?" "Yes, but it is a bit disobedient and is rebelling against me. If it doesn't apologize, it can't eat meat. Only by being obedient can it be forgiven. When the time comes, I will introduce it to you. Maybe you can even touch it." Achi was pleasantly surprised. "Ah, can Achi touch the dragon?" "Of course." "Hee, thank you, brother." After a while, List began to prepare the food. He lit the firewood and barbecued it, letting the aroma of the food waft around. This time, the little fire dragon hovered in the sky, letting out "oh roar" sounds from time to time. It did not leave nor did it land. As the sky gradually darkened, the aroma of the food was enough. List glanced at the little fire dragon in the sky and slowly ate, eating very slowly. Roar. The little fire dragon flew closer and closer. Finally, it could not hold back and landed on the beach 10 meters away. Its eyes stared blankly at the large piece of roasted beef leg in List's hand. Its saliva dripped from the corner of its mouth and evaporated as it fell to the ground. List had observed that the saliva of fire dragons contained relatively impure magic power, which directly blended into the air. It was different from the saliva of gem dragons and metal dragons, which produced crystal ores. The same was true for dragon dung. The little fire dragon's dung was also directly vaporized. And the impure magic power excreted by the little fire dragon in List's body was definitely not dragon dung. In its magic form, the little fire dragon had no shape or structure. It was just a magic converter that could exchange magic power. List tore off a piece of beef leg and chewed it in big mouthfuls. He always chewed slowly according to the standard nobles. But this time it made a very loud sound and it made a squeaking sound. Every time it smacked its lips, it was a blow to the little fire dragon Leo, whose stomach was growling. When he ate half of the roasted beef leg, Leo finally gave up being reserved and roared at List, "Oh roar! I wanted to eat meat." List glanced at it faintly and did not respond. "Oh roar! Oh roar! Oh roar!" Leo approached step by step and its voice became weaker and weaker. By the time it reached List, it was almost pitifully begging. List looked at it and said, "Same choice as before. First, starve to death. Second, let me ride you. I will make sure you eat until you are full and you can eat top-grade beef every day." Leo raised its neck. "Oh roar! You don't want to be ridden?" "Oh roar! Are you sure?" "Oh roar! Then you can wait to starve to death. This island is 800 kilometers away from the nearest island. You can't fly there. Even if you fly there, you will be discovered by the humans and caught. At that time, no one will be as nice as me. If you don't let me ride you, you will be slaughtered and eaten." Hearing this, Leo took 3 steps back and put his wings on the ground to show his resistance. List calmly took out another roasted beef leg and placed it on the fire to roast. He used a brush to brush a layer of glistening yellow oil, and the dripping oil splashed on the fire, making a sizzling sound. Chapter 562. Come here. List beckoned. Leo sat in place for a while before slowly crawling towards List. Dragons have 4 legs and a pair of wings. They can fly, stand on their hind legs, crawl on all fours and walk like a dinosaur. However, Leo was crawling with its hind legs squatting, its forelimbs raised, and its wings propped on the ground to maintain balance. Its speed was very slow and its posture was very strange. Just like the entanglement in its heart, it could be felt through the wrinkled scales on the dragon's face and the struggling look in the dragon's eyes. It approached. When it was only 1 meter away, it stopped, swallowed its saliva, and could no longer take its eyes off the roasted beef leg. It was impossible to know what it was like in its magic form, but in the state of flesh and blood, it had to eat blood. During the time he raised it, List naturally did his homework. He clearly summarized the little fire dragon's habits, behavior, sounds, and logical thinking. The intelligence of a dragon was definitely similar to that of a teenager, even if Leo was just a newborn dragon. Its IQ was much higher than that of a great elf. A great elf was about the IQ of a 10-year-old child. It could speak clearly and communicate normally without any hindrance, but it would not take the initiative to think about problems. Animals with higher IQ were obviously easier to communicate with. In addition to the language barrier, List and Leo could communicate with each other through language, behavior, and emotions, achieving a seamless communication. Leo could directly understand List's serpentine, and with the help of his facial expressions, he could understand the meaning. List could also judge Leo's meaning from his tone and behavior. When Leo lived on his chest and existed in magic form, they could vaguely sense each other's emotions and communicate more directly. Compared to the great elf, he could rely on the power of the contract to suppress the barrier. There was no contract between him and Leo. It was very difficult to influence the other party through communication, especially since Leo was very stubborn. It would not be easy to tame it without some means. Do you want to eat? He raised the roasted beef leg and cut a hole on it with a knife. Suddenly, the aroma of roasted meat became stronger. Leo nodded involuntarily. Roar. Same choice. First, starve to death. Second, let me ride you. List cut a leg of beef and threw it to Charmander. Charmander opened its mouth and bit the beef thigh, swallowing it whole. Then, he stared at the roasted beef leg with a conflicted gaze and did not answer List. List cut another piece of beef thigh and threw it to it. Then he put down the knife in his hand and calmly asked, "How is it? How does the roasted beef thigh taste? This is your favorite dish. I've prepared a lot here. As long as you let me ride you, you can cultivate in the volcano from now on." When you come out of the volcano, you'll have beef thighs to eat. If he hadn't eaten, Leo might have been able to resist the temptation. However, the lingering taste of the two beef thighs was still in its mouth, and it really couldn't resist. It could only use its tiny forelegs to hug its dragon head and shake it frantically to prevent its will from continuing to decline. But the more he resisted, the more he couldn't change his depraved attitude. In the end, it helplessly let out a huge roar. Its body instantly turned into a ball of flame and rushed towards List. Boom. It crashed into List's body, followed the meridians of his fighting energy, and stopped at his chest. Then, List felt that Leo was trying to communicate with him emotionally. First, it solemnly expressed that it would never accept the fate of being ridden. "Are you sure you don't want to let me ride you?" Roar. "If you don't let me ride you, then don't even think about eating meat. I won't let you even if I take drugs." Roar. Leo expressed its dissatisfaction, and then it released another emotion, saying that it could help List cultivate in exchange for food. It was very determined not to let List ride it. List was a little puzzled. He didn't know why it was so resistant to being ridden. As far as he knew, the dragon of the Sapphire Grand Duke had been used as a transportation tool to transport a batch of strategic materials from the mainland back to the Blue Dragon Island. It could even transport goods, so naturally, it could also transport people. It was just that no one could become its dragon knight. Now, this little Charmander was not even willing to ride it. It wasn't even willing to ride it once. It was really displeasing. It was probably impossible to ride the dragon in one go, so List could only settle for the next best thing, and forced the little fire dragon to cultivate and improve together with him. After repeated negotiations, he agreed to Leo's deal. "I can temporarily not ride you, but you must help me cultivate with all your might. You can't be lazy at all. The effect of the demonic dragon chi refinement must be 5 times better than if I take the potions alone. As for the dragon breath tempering, you must guarantee that you can't spit it out at all." Roar. Leo cried out, feeling wronged. "You don't have to feel wronged. I was the one who found the volcano for you, so it's equivalent to me giving you the most suitable training ground. Moreover, I will provide you with a batch of potions regularly to speed up your growth. It can be said that it's a win-win situation for us to cultivate together. Use your stupid brain and think carefully." After a moment, Leo agreed. Then it suddenly rushed out of List's chest, transformed from the flames, and landed on the beach. It took the roasted beef leg that List handed over and wolfed it down. Its appetite was very big and it had no problem eating a cow for a meal. After eating a roasted beef leg, it continued to eat the food that List handed over. It also included the eggs of the green feather duck, the meat of the fire rabbit, the milk of the bampo, and so on. In order to raise it, List had spent a lot of money. It was better for Leo to eat than for himself. After Leo was half full, Yizichin looked at him. He said, "Leo, don't be in a hurry to eat. Come with me to the beach, I'll take you to see someone. This person is my family. In the future, when I return to the territory, she will often come to take care of you and bring you food." Leo gave him a "I don't want to see" look. "If you don't want to starve in the future, you'd better meet her." And so, the little fire dragon reluctantly followed behind List to the beach with a large piece of steak in its mouth. Achi had been waiting on the beach. When she saw List coming over with the little fire dragon, her two big watery eyes almost curved into crescent moons, and many small stars appeared. Wow, brother, this is the little fire dragon Leo. It's so beautiful. Achi wanted to get closer, but she didn't dare to. Leo swallowed the steak in his mouth and roared directly at the siren. He did not have the slightest good impression of the other party because the other party was a lovely, beautiful, and pure siren. On the contrary, he was deeply arrogant and disdainful. Perhaps in his heart, List was barely a delivery boy and other lives were ants. To give List face, he did not attack Achi. Obviously, List needed more. He directly touched Leo's belly and said, "She is Achi. When I am not on the Dodo Island, Achi will be responsible for feeding you. You can't hurt her, understand?" For the sake of food in the future, Leo reluctantly responded, "Roar. As a gesture of friendship, let Achi touch you now. Roar." Leo instantly bristled and roared at List with his teeth bared. Faint flames spurted from his two nostrils. This was anger after being provoked. Achi hurriedly said, "Brother, Leo is angry. Achi doesn't have to touch it, just look at it." List was a little stunned. He did not expect Leo to react so aggressively. It dared to bare its teeth at him in front of Achi. It could be seen that the task of taming it was still a long way to go. "It's my first time seeing it, so I'm a little shy." He simply concealed his embarrassment and said calmly, "Then I'll go with Leo to practice first. There will be a lot of time in the future. Leo will be friendly to you." Chapter 563. Oh. Roar. On the cliff of the crater, Leo's head drooped. He was exhausted. He had been spitting out dragon breath for a full 10 minutes, completely draining his magic to help List temper his body with dragon breath. This time he was definitely not acting. He was really so tired that he could not even take the potion. The flame was extinguished. Shaking off the ashes on his body, List let out a long sigh. It had been a long time since he had trained so freely. The effect of today's training was equivalent to training alone for half a month. It was no wonder that the Dragon Knight was the most powerful fighting force in the world. The help of a dragon in training was too great. Leo was just a young dragon that had not even been born for a month. If he did not experience it himself, he would not be able to understand the pleasure and refreshing feeling of training with a dragon. When the dragon demon refines chi, it was like coming out of a sauna. The comfort was indescribable. When the dragon breath tempered his body, it was like getting a full-body massage. Even his bones were being stepped on. Looking at the dejected Leo, List knew that he had squeezed this disobedient little fire dragon dry. "I need about 5 days to digest what I have gained from today's training. If I do it too frequently, my body will not be able to take it. After all, the human body cannot be compared to the body of a dragon." List moved his arms and legs, feeling the state of his body, and concluded. So he said to Leo, "Rest well. This is the magic potion you deserve. I will ask Achi to prepare a pile of fish for you by the sea in 3 days. 5 days later, I will come here again and bring you your favorite beef. Then we will continue training according to today's pace." "Roar." Leo answered weakly and silently swallowed the giant algae magic potion that List gave him. Touching Leo's belly, List waved his hand and said, "Go back to the volcano and train well. I don't know how long this volcano can last, so you should seize the time. I believe that with the magic of the volcano, the help of the magic potion, and my training, the time you need to grow will be greatly shortened." Roar. Leo nodded like a human. Then he flapped his wings and dived into the lava in the crater, disappearing. List changed into a new set of clothes and returned to the wooden house at the foot of the mountain to rest. The next morning, he was awakened by the sound of doo-doo. It's the dodo bird, a species unique to this island. Even the island got its name from the dodo bird. List had seen a dodo a few days ago. It was a bird that was slightly smaller than a turkey. It looked a little ugly and could not fly, but it was good at digging holes. It would hide in a hole when it was startled. No matter what happened outside, it would bury its head and not come out. Therefore, when the descendants of the sun had no food to eat, they dug bird holes and took them out one by one. Unfortunately, the meat of the dodo was extremely unpalatable, like eating dry firewood. It was hard to swallow. List was not interested in them at all. However, it was really disturbing his sleep to let them howl outside. He didn't want to wake up so early, so his mood became bad. He simply got up, walked out of the wooden house and went to drive away the dodos. The dodos were about 100 meters away from the forest. It looked like they were having a restless gathering. Who knew how many dodos were going crazy? When he got closer, he found that the dodos were not going crazy, but were surrounding a black snake as thick as a bowl. He knew this snake. He had hunted one in the forest of the Thorns Ridge before. It could release the dark magic vortex, the dark attribute World of Warcraft shadow snake. There were a few puddles of corroded dodos on the ground. Obviously, this was the masterpiece of the shadow snake. But this did not scare away the dodos. They frantically surrounded the shadow snake, trying to peck it. One after another, they jumped and jumped, their short wings flapping like a windmill. Seeing this, List directly used his chi and rushed over. With a dash, he grabbed the shadow snake's neck and instantly wrapped it with chi. Then he gently sent it into the gem space. Then he kicked the dodos away. Disperse, disperse, don't make any more noise, a bunch of unpalatable trash. After driving away the dodo bird, he began to check the shadow snake in the gem space. In just a few breaths, the shadow snake was dead. It could not be more dead. Except for Virginia Truth, who was in a soul state and parasitic in the soul storage jar, no creature with a soul could survive in the gem space. The fundamental reason List guessed was that the gem space belonged to a different plane, where the rules were not sound and could not support the existence of the soul. Even Virginia, whose parasitic soul storage jar was stuffed into the gem space, would be like static, unable to even dream. According to List's experiment, Virginia could dream in the soul storage jar, in a dreamlike state. She could feel the passage of time but not strongly. At most, she could feel the slight difference between a day and a month inside. But in the gem space, this feeling was chaotic and she could not feel the passage of time. So, the ability to erase souls was used by List for hunting. Low-level World of Warcraft could not resist his chi, so he could catch them. It was ineffective against humans with chi in high-level World of Warcraft. Because the chi would be resisted, it could not be completely wrapped, and it could not be sent into the gem space. The complete snakeskin of the shadow snake could be sold for more than 12 gold coins. He could not bear to let the dodos peck it or be cut by himself. It was just right to use this trick to directly destroy the soul, leaving a complete snake body. Not bad, the dodos are very weak and they did not hurt the snakeskin. This is the best quality. 15 gold coins should be worth it. The snakeskin could be sold for money, and the remaining parts could be used as a wine dish. 15 gold coins were easily earned, and the dissatisfaction caused by the disturbing dream had completely disappeared. He was just about to leave when suddenly he saw a cluster of vines wrapped around the skull tree. Looking straight ahead, he saw the vines climbing up the tree trunk, almost fusing with the human skull tree. There were also climbing vines on the skulls next to them. This should be the hemp rope vine reward for me. He quickly reacted and walked towards the skull tree. As he approached, more and more hemp rope vines appeared in front of him. Sure enough, it was a large piece. These hemp rope vines were not magic ingredients, but ordinary plants with small leaves and not thick vines. Some had light yellow flowers and some had capsules. If one did not look carefully, it was really difficult to find the flowers and capsules. No wonder he could not find the hemp rope vine even though it was only 100 meters away from the wooden house. What is the use of these capsules? List picked a few and rubbed open the shell. Inside were black seeds like cut watermelon petals. They are so small and they don't look like they can be eaten. Maybe I should collect a specimen and some seeds and go back to ask others. He was ready to pull off a hemp rope vine. The vine was wrapped tightly and he could not pull it off, so he was ready to break it. However, as he increased his strength, an embarrassing thing happened. The hemp rope vine did not break at all. Even when it pulled on the hemp rope vine and broke a human skull branch that was as thick as a wrist, the hemp rope vine still did not break. It's too strong. It's called hemp rope vine. Does it mean that it's as strong as hemp rope? List's eyes quickly lit up. If the effect was really like that, the hemp rope vine would be very useful. Ropes were very useful in daily life. The ropes that humans used were hemp rope, which was a rope made of linen and sisal. Although it was strong, it was easy to rot. Especially the fishing nets used in the territory. Basically, after soaking in the water for 3 days, it would take 2 days to dry in the sun to prevent them from rotting. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.